those tariffs down. Caroline Levitt told reporters she had just spoken to the president about it.
This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years? It's not a surprise because, as Reuters recently wrote, Amazon has partnered with a Chinese propaganda arm. So this is another reason why Americans should buy American.
Shares in Amazon fell more than 2% in pre-market trading following the White House remarks. In the last few minutes, Amazon has said the idea was considered on the low-cost Amazon Hall store, but never a consideration for the main Amazon site. At the same press conference, reporters were told Donald Trump is creating the world's greatest economy as he reaches 100 days in office as US president. It's despite major economic shocks caused by tariffs imposed on imports. The UK is among a number of countries negotiating trade deals. UK Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the outcomes of those discussions will revive confidence among spooked investors.
As we start moving forward, announcing deals, then there will be certainty. But certainty is not necessarily a good thing in negotiating.
A court has heard two men accused of felling the Sycamore Gap tree revelled in their infamy after the act made headlines across the country. The trial of Daniel Graham and Adam Carruthers has begun, with both denying causing criminal damage to the tree and to Hadrian's Wall. Times Radio's Deputy Head of News, Alex Dibble, has more.
As prosecutors laid out their case, they told the court the two friends filmed themselves cutting the tree down in a moronic mission. Jurors were played the video, this 2 minutes and 40 seconds long video, in which you can hear a cracking noise as the tree begins to fall and then it hits the ground with a gentle thud. The court heard the next day, when the news broke, the men were sending each other message after message, reveling in it, but that now their friendship appears to have unraveled.
And Marks & Spencer says it has pockets of limited availability in some stores as it deals with the fallout of a cyber attack. It follows reports of empty food shelves in some branches. And remember, our news podcasts are on the Times Radio app. Look for the Times News Briefing and The World in 10.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker.
John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with NatWest Cushion.
Hello, I'm John Pienaar with Drive on Times Radio, coming to you live from across the road from Donald Trump's White House in Washington, D.C. It is a glorious spring day here in the American capital, passing the city's snow-white marble and stone monuments to freedom and democracy, the Capitol building, the Lincoln Memorial, the White House, just over the way from where I'm sitting talking to you now. They've really never looked lovelier. It is hard to believe that barely 3 months into his presidency, America's historic role as champion of the free world, pillar of the Atlantic Alliance, as the engine of global trade and free markets, and as the exemplar of the rule of law, if by that you mean respect for the courts and the guardrails of presidential power. It's hard to believe President Trump has trashed all of it. And just as he promised, you have to give him that. We are used to seeing Ukraine fearful of being abandoned by America to the mercies of Vladimir Putin. Not our war, as President Trump puts it. It is still weird, though, to see Mark Carney, the leader of America's closest and most peaceful neighbour, get elected overnight and then swear to resist President Trump's efforts to break Canada so he can own it. So today is a day to tip your MAGA hat if you've got one and if you still want to. Though apparently most Americans aren't happy at all, at least according to the latest opinion polls. 64% say the country's heading in the wrong direction. Over 40% say they're actually in fear for the future. And the rest of us, well, it's fair to say, I think, that there's plenty of fear and concern to go around. So What will the next 100 days be like for Ukraine and for NATO, for economies, including ours in Britain, desperately angling to escape or at least blunt the edge of Trump's trade tariffs? And what's waiting in the next 3.5 years? Well, no one knows. That's the truthful answer to that. But stay with me, and we're going to peer into the fog of the future together, through our fingers, hoping for the best. Remember, tens of millions of Americans supported Donald Trump, and they still do. And mostly right and far-right parties and politicians around the world, they love him too, of course. We're going to stay as dispassionate as we know how. We're going to hear from friends and admirers and mortal political enemies of President Trump, and from Americans who'd really rather be neither. And I would love to hear from you. Tell me what you're thinking right now. Send me a text, 87222. Start with the word Times, or a tweet to @TimesRadio. Now, we're streaming live on YouTube, just so you know, if you want to watch and see what we're saying as well as hear what we are saying. An additional treat for you if you just want to log on to YouTube. Otherwise, just stay with us and listen. I promise you, as far as I can, you're not going to regret any of that. Now, let's start with this. The White House Press Secretary, Cardin, she has been holding a news conference with the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent.
Today officially marks 100 days of promises made and promises kept by President Trump. This has truly been the most historic start to a presidency in American history. After building the greatest economy in the world in his first term as president, President Trump is in the process of doing that all over again. The American people trust in President Trump. Since his first day in office, President Trump has focused on defeating the Biden inflation crisis, bringing down the cost of living, and making the United States the best place in the world to do business, invest, create jobs, and innovate. And President Trump's efforts are working.
That was Caroline Leavitt, the most historic start to a presidency in history. More so than Abe Lincoln at the Civil War, George Washington at the foundation of the Republic. And who knows, maybe she's even right. And she didn't stop there.
At this point, President Trump has secured more investments in the United States of America in 100 days than Joe Biden did in 4 years. President Trump is America's businessman in chief, and that's why these trillions of dollars in investments are flooding to our country. The business community is bullish on America because President Trump is back in charge. Under President Trump, there has never been a better time to invest in America. And the president finally said enough is enough and refused to allow America and our workers to be ripped off any longer on trade. President Trump implemented powerful tariffs to end the era of economic surrender and to rebalance America's trading agreements. More than 100 countries have already come to the table looking to offer more favorable terms for America and our people. There has never been a president who has created his own leverage like this president, and we are just getting started.
Well, she's certainly right when she says there's never been a president like this president. That is the cheerleader-in-chief to the commander-in-chief. And now, our journalist-in-chief here in Washington, Katie Bowles, the Washington editor of the Times and the Sunday Times. Great to see you, Casey. Thanks for joining us in our little outpost over the road from the White House. You're now settling, Casey, into D.C. as the new Washington editor, and congratulations for that. Politics where we are from, over at Westminster and London, the last few years, it's been like a white water ride, hasn't it? And just to torture the metaphor, forgive me, it's going to seem like a slow walk in the park compared to what you're taking over here.
Yeah, I think there's something in there. And I think just as UK politics felt it was perhaps calming down a bit, I find myself in Washington, D.C., in what is clearly a roller coaster. And I think touching on the points you just made and what we heard from Donald Trump's press secretary, of course, spinning a very positive story. But, I've just been here a week, and it's quite clear that there is a lot of anxiety in Trump's base and amongst some of Trump's supporters in the election about tariffs, about whether this is actually going to be pulled off in the way that they think it is, how the markets are going to respond. And that goes pretty high up in the Trump administration. And then you also add to that some of the things Trump said he would do in his first 100 days, such as that deal with Ukraine. Now, perhaps that is going to move very quickly at some point, but he has a lot of unfinished business, even by his own metrics, for how he wanted the first couple of months to go. Yeah,
you've got to wonder, this is such a uniquely Trumpite ideological project. Did he think through where it was going to lead him in terms of, the blowback in the markets, the blowback from public opinion, because there have been some big moves in the opinion polls, and I'm going to come to all of that. And I'm just starting by looking now, Katie, through this British lens, because I'm right fresh off the plane. The tariffs, this plan, this grand defining plan, it looks like a work in progress still. Just now we've got the news of a softening around cars and car part tariffs, so some relief for British car makers. Okay, good. And also success for the lobbyists of the US auto industry. But it makes you wonder, are they making it up, Katie, as they go along?
Well, you hear various theories, and perhaps it's just a game of 5D chess that most of us can't quite catch up with. We're playing checkers. But I think that it's quite clear that even within Trump's own circle, if you look at the senior figures in his administration, Scott Bessent, in a different place than some of the more protectionist pro-tariffs. He's had different voices, and I think they have, at the very least, been a little bit spooked by the market response on those tariffs, which is why we do see these concessions and things being moved. And even today, one of the press briefings we've had is Karen and Leavitt talking about Amazon and the fact that they plan to list what the tariff is doing to the price of products on Amazon.
Yes.
And that's had a very hostile response from the White House, which shows, they are quite rattled.
How can they not know they're putting a tax? They don't call it a tax, but putting a tax on imports on this level, even though they're being rowed back here and rowed back there, it does not mean higher prices. How can you possibly not know that? So let's look, though, at it from the the point of view of the rest of the world, starting with us in Britain. Put Britain first, that's what I say. And Keir Starmer, we read in the Times, he's weighing in now to try and get again on Trump's good side. He's offering Turnberry, the golf course, as the venue for the Open, the oldest and greatest golf tournament on earth. They are sparing no efforts to get on the right side of this guy.
No, and I think you do have to hand it to number 10 that if your job is to use charm, the state visit, that big, very visual display when Keir Starmer met Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Also going now for the golf course. They are working out the things that Donald Trump likes and the things that he likes to talk about on those private phone calls, and just going for it. There's almost a brashness to it, which I think the transactional nature may be something that actually plays quite well with the White House. The question is, does the UK still believe that the US is a reliable ally in the long term? Because you will clearly want to keep the White House and Donald Trump on side, but we hear about deals with the EU. We know there's that European reset, and it could be the case that I think there are a few signs that perhaps long term the UK government is feeling the EU is a more reliable partner right now. Yeah,
I mean, you do hear that that's where Downing Street is moving. Lastly, just a word on the war in Ukraine. Getting Trump to sit down with Volodymyr Zelensky in the St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican in that way, under the brightest possible arc light, during a furniture, it was a triumph of manipulative diplomacy, Casey. It even got him to threaten Putin with sanctions. But who knows if Trump means it?
We don't, and I think, as you say, it was there's stunning photos, and you thought this is a moment where you can use this phrase a lot. History is being made. It felt it was there. Now, I think the point is there are lots of people around Donald Trump who have quite negative views on Ukraine. If you look at the MAGA base, or even if you look at his vice president JD Vance,
for sure,
and that America First approach, and therefore I actually think in these talks, European allies think Donald Trump is actually one of the easier people to get around or to get their message to. The problem is when he starts to speak to some of his colleagues back in the White House.
Yeah, I know that Donald Trump is comparatively easy to do business with. That is a new one of me. Okay, so you're going to stay with us, and it's lovely to have your company through the show today. Now, let's just look at how this story looks from way beyond American shores. We've known already from today's news how Donald Trump has heavily influenced and maybe even decided the Canadian election, and in a way that he wanted least. And we're going to come to that. And, of course, Ukraine too. Hear about that in a minute. But first, let's look at the way things look in Brussels, in Europe. Bruno Waterfield is the Times Europe correspondent. Hello to you, Bruno.
Good afternoon.
Bruno, just share your thoughts on the way that this president, we're looking at him in his 100th day, how he has impacted and changed the economic and political and the strategic weather across the rest of Europe.
Well, I think in terms of geopolitics, in terms of strategic terrain and the whole setup, it's been something of a revolution. It's very hard now to believe that since February, on a continent that moves rather glacially politically on the whole, since February, the EU has set up a 150 billion euro rearmament a fund funded out of national government's contributions to Brussels. They're setting up a rearmament bank. There's a coalition of the willing, led by Britain and France, to send effectively to underscore with security guarantees any future settlements in Ukraine. NATO is on the back seat. The future of NATO is very, very uncertain. Will there be an American general commanding it after doing all that's happened in a few weeks? And that is a real revolution. I mean, these discussions about the future of NATO have been rumbling on for almost 20 years, and it's all suddenly come to a head over a few weeks, and the Europeans have had to move very, very quickly. And that is actually a revolution. That is quite staggering how that has changed in Trump's first 100 days. And I think that aspect of the European relationship with America's the guarantor of security in Europe, and that fading away, leaving Europeans holding the Ukraine baby, that's huge, absolutely huge. It's still playing out.
It is, Bruno, astounding. And as you say, you've got the French and British leaders getting together to put together some kind of force, in as far as that's practicable, to police a ceasefire in Ukraine when and if that happens. And meanwhile, you've got leaders like Merz in Germany, who's openly contemplating a new European defence alliance, which is distinct from the NATO we've already and always known.
Well, I mean, it's already happening. We can see it already happening. This coalition of the willing is that in embryo. It is a new European military alliance. It's on the front foot, not under an American umbrella. And that's in terms of Germans as well. I mean, that is a complete revolution. And there is a real worry there as well. Can Europe do it? I mean, they are very, very worried about the sounds that come from Trump and some in the MAGA camp that are, effectively pro-Putin. That's offset by Keith Kellogg, who's a more traditional sort of American general, who soothes them that America's still the backstop, America's still a reliable ally. But people are feeling the cold winds of the possibility that Europe has to stand more or less alone against Russia, and it's not ready for it. Poll after poll shows that in most European countries, less than 10% of the population is ready to go to war for another NATO ally is invaded. And you imagine if you're Poland or the Baltic states, the prospect of Europe having to stand alone is pretty frightening.
Fascinating stuff, interesting stuff, alarming stuff. Bruno Waterfield there in Brussels, thank you so much. Now, what about Kyiv? What about Ukraine? We do remember, don't we, Donald Trump saying he was going to end the Ukraine war in a day. Look, maybe no one should have taken that very, very literally, but it hasn't been a day. It hasn't been anything like a day. 100 days into the presidency, we still don't know whether Putin is going to get what he wants, maybe even with the help of Donald Trump. What are they thinking in Kyiv? Well, Katerina Doroshina is a local producer in Kyiv and sent us this report.
As time goes by, it's hard to underestimate the American support towards Ukraine. Mr. President, Mr. Trump and his team clearly wants to help us to navigate through the negotiation process with Russia. But it would be an enormous help if they could take more action after all the problems we already faced, after the breakage of ceasefire, after all the deals that were broken, and after Russia admitting North Korean army taking part in the invasion. It might seem to be hard, but we strongly believe that America's help would lead us to better understanding and managing this situation.
And that is Katerina Doroshina reporting there from Kyiv. Now, in a moment, I'm going to be joined right here in our pop-up studio just over the road from the White House by Carla Sands, who's a former U.S. ambassador and a member of Donald Trump's Economic Advisory Panel. The time now is 4:18. I'm John Pienaar here on Times Radio live from Washington, D.C. in association with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
Election Night Special with Rosie Wright on Times Radio.
The local elections are looming. How will Labour fare now they're in power? Will reform soak up support? And will the Conservatives hit their admittedly low expectations? There'll be votes for a new MP in Runcorn and Helsby, several mayor and local authorities all on the 1st of May. So join me, Rosie Rosie Wright as we take you through the results as and when they come in.
Election Night Special with Rosie Wright this Friday morning from 4 a.m. on Times Radio.
This year marks the 80th anniversary of VE Day. The Army Benevolent Fund was created to ensure support was available for soldiers returning from the Second World War. Field Marshal Montgomery featured in the charity's first appeal.
We owe a debt to these men and to the families of those who have fallen. Let us
Joining me now in our pop-up studio just over the road from the White House on a glorious Washington spring day, as promised, Carla Sands, who's a former Trump economic advisor and the former U.S. ambassador to Denmark. Hello to you, Ambassador. May I call you Carla?
Please call me Carla.
It's lovely to see you in the flesh. We've spoken before. Carla,
yes,
you look very cheerful, very chirpy. You're dressed in a very elegant bright red jacket, true Trump team style. Are you celebrating today?
I'm just happy because it's a beautiful spring day, but it's also Trump's 100th day anniversary of him ushering in the glorious golden age for America.
Have you plans to celebrate today? Are you partying or anything of that kind?
John, every day is Christmas.
Every day is a party time.
President Trump was elected.
Now, Carla, tell me, look.
We're safer here in Washington, D.C. because he was elected.
Okay, let's talk about some of those things. So, as an American patriot, Carla, as a former senior diplomat, as a former economic advisor to Donald Trump. Carla, when you hear, as we all heard this morning, the Prime Minister of Canada rallying his country in defiance of President Trump, who he described as wanting to break Canada so he can own it, what did you think and feel?
You know, I think that the leader of Canada needs to put Canada first and put the Canadian people first. So I just think he's doing his job. I think President Trump is trying to secure the Western Hemisphere. Canada's been under a lot of Chinese Communist Party influence over the past, I would say it's really increased over the past decade. We see what's happened with the Panama Canal and China taking over there. The largest port in the Western Hemisphere is just being constructed now outside of Lima, Peru, called the Chanquete Port. It's the CCP's biggest investment. And we can see that they're pulling a lot of wealth out of our hemisphere, taking it back to China and benefiting, and we want to see our hemisphere also grow and prosper.
I mean, Carla, look, the question of China having control of the Panama Canal, you know that's hotly contested. I'm not going to go there because I'm keen on getting your thoughts on Canada. In what earthly way is China controlling Canada, Carla?
Well, during the pandemic, I was told by friends that went to Canada that there was Chinese police on the border, that Chinese doctors were doing the COVID testing, and China unleashed the pandemic on the world. Out of Wuhan, China, Chairman Xi said close the airports from Wuhan to the rest of China, but he said open the airports from Wuhan to the rest of the world. And he had Tedros, the head of the WHO, echoing the same message. Don't be discriminatory. Open your airports and your countries to people from Wuhan and from China.
But Canada is an independent sovereign nation. For all you're saying there, you do not believe anything but that. to
well,
be the truth.
Let's talk about the good news of the 100 days. Let's talk about the wins. We can see President Trump is working on the trade.
Just overnight. There's obviously interest in that.
Well, yes, but the election is completed in Canada. We know who won. Congratulations to the winner. We're going to have a great trading relationship with our closest neighbor. I mean, we're so close, but they have the scourge of fentanyl in Canada now, especially among the indigenous population.
I may be wrong about this, Carla, but as I understand it, the amount of fentanyl that's crossed the border from Canada into the United States over the space of a year would fill one suitcase. It's about 20 kilograms.
But Canada itself is suffering from fentanyl as well, and it's from China. It's controlled by the Mexican cartels, and now the Chinese are literally laundering the money of all of the Mexican cartels. This is billions of dollars a year. But let's talk about the wins. President Trump securing our border, bringing our DOD back to being a lethal fighting force. Let's talk about MAGA, taking dangerous chemicals that you don't allow in the UK into your food out, especially those dyes, and then finding the cause of autism. Scientifically, why hasn't that been done? Thank God RFK Jr. is there in place. And
Carla, on those points, I mean, look, you make a perfectly fair point when you say that the traffic of unlawful migrants across the southern border has gone down very, very significantly. It's now down to a couple of hundred. It used to be thousands. That is a significant gain. I mean, one could argue that process began under the last president. But I'm not going to get hung up on that point.
He did that to try to win the election, but his goal was to change America, change our culture, change our population in order to have a permanent leftist government.
Okay, I hear your point, and people listening have heard your point. You then also argue that autism, you're dealing with the scourge of autism, and your new health secretary tells us that has to do with vaccines. It's a byproduct of vaccination.
Why don't we find out
all
what
over
the cause
world
is?
Say that's not the case.
They've never even done studies on what causes autism. How come not? Why aren't any of these vaccines actually tested before they're given to children? They're not.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people, including in this country, are worried about that analysis.
No, well, let's find out. Let's use scientific analysis and find out the cause.
Okay, let me ask you about a very
active ending
point.
That's a scourge on so many families.
Right, let me ask you about tariffs. We've got a limited time together, and again, thank you for coming along. It's
my pleasure to be with you in person, John.
Look, do you really believe, Carla, that it's a rip-off for friendly countries to sell things to Americans that Americans want and freely choose to buy? Isn't that just good old capitalism? Isn't that good old freedom of choice in the market economy that America's meant to stand for?
I mean, I think that we're not talking about the same thing. Almost every country in the world has had higher tariffs and barriers on American goods than we've had on theirs.
The president speaks about imports into America as if it's a form of robbery, like it's plundering.
He's already bringing billions of dollars in every month because of these tariffs. Our country didn't even have an income tax for hundreds of years because we had tariffs, and they were enough to fund the federal government. But I will just say this. He's working to reindustrialize the United States. It's not, yes, it's about getting fair and reciprocal trade, but it's also, we can't be a service economy and not make things that are important, like pharmaceuticals, steel,
Americans
aluminum,
are worried about the effects of the tariffs
manufacturing
on their
of cars,
cost of living.
But if you don't make things, you can't be a great power.
Sure. Yeah. I recognise that. And I know the aim, and we all know the aim, is to get jobs back into America, those offshore companies back into American
but it's national
territory.
Security at the bottom. At the end of the day, it's about national security.
Americans are worried, though. Faith in the administration's handling of the economy has really sunk.
Because the leftist media is scaring them to death.
Isn't that a bit insulting to the sense of the voters?
It's insulting to the American people that the media is so biased. It's so biased that at the recent Correspondents dinner, they actually talked about how they were culpable, that they had hid the mental decline of Joe Biden and that they were responsible.
Well, maybe that sounds like the media just giving itself a kick as well as everybody else, which is what the media is actually meant to do. I do want to ask you about Ukraine, if I may. Look, since long before I was born, and Carla, I was born quite a long time ago.
So was I, John.
Not as long ago as me. And America has been the standard bearer of democracy. I'm sure you're proud of that. So for America to walk away, in the work of the vice president, from the defense of Ukraine against an illegal invasion in which innocent men and women and children, Carla, have been raped and tortured and killed. Could America possibly walk away from that cause with honor?
It's a terrible thing what's happened.
Straightforward question. Could I ask you for an answer?
It's a terrible thing. People are dying on both sides. But the bottom line is this would never have happened if we didn't have a weak president, Joe Biden, that had the disastrous Afghanistan withdrawal, said to Putin at the podium, a minor incursion or two, we're not going to do anything about it. And then he said, we're not going to sanction Nord Stream 2, the Russian gas pipeline, that my team and I actually blocked the completion of Nord Stream 2. The only place it was never completed was my area of responsibility when I served as ambassador.
All right, let's then talk about your ambassadorship, because you were ambassador to Denmark. You know the country very well. You will know more than most of us that Denmark is a friendly, peaceful, pro-European state, which is friendly to America. Could it ever be right to compel Denmark's territory of Greenland to become part of America against their free will?
Well, you know, Greenlanders want to be independent. It has nothing to do with Denmark or the U.S. Greenlanders have said they're going to go independent. The fact is, we can't let an independent Greenland fall into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party.
What about letting an independent Greenland fall into the hands of Greenland, which is what Greenlanders want?
Greenland has no military. They have no defense. They've never been able to develop because Denmark hasn't developed them. They rely on a welfare transfer from Denmark of about $600 million a year.
Okay, Katie Bowles is here.
Yeah, Katie.
I suppose on Greenland, I mean, how do you think Trump is going to go about this? Because it's quite clear that they don't want to be bought. So is it a bit of a non-starter?
You know, I think that we'll see what happens. I can't get inside President Trump's head, but it's something that we worked on in the first administration to secure Greenland because they are vulnerable. They have aspirations. They want to be wealthy. They want to have good paying jobs. And they, for the most part, don't, because Denmark, the kind of, owner, if you will, they're not really, they're, quasi-independent. It's called semi-autonomous. But they want opportunity. And they want to live their Greenlandic dream, and they're never going to achieve it with Denmark.
And you mentioned tariffs earlier and the leftist media. I just wondered, what do you make of what Amazon has obviously announced today, which is listing the tariff within the price online? Because it's had quite a furious response from the White House, but I'm not sure if we can say Jeff Bezos is leftist.
Well, we can say that Jeff Bezos is leftist. Yes, quite leftist. I have to say, when I walked into your studios, there's CNN on, there's MSNBC, but there's no other side. There's no counterpoint. There's no like Newsmax or Fox News or Voice of America. There's no like other side. So the left is pretty entrenched in the media. Jeff Bezos is the left. I'm glad he's going to list it because we can watch the good news, because the good news is that we're going to onshore a lot of manufacturing. And it's going to look different than it used to look. We're going to onshore jobs. People right now, President Trump has created 100,000 new jobs, 5,000 new manufacturing jobs. And under Joe Biden, we were losing 6,000 manufacturing jobs a month. This is a new day for America, and it's good.
All right, Carla, I've got to leave it there because time has run out. It's a pleasure talking to you as always.
Great to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us on the program. Now, coming up in a moment, I'm going to get an update on the markets from Robert Miller at the Times Business Desk. And I'm going to be joined by Ben Cardin, who's a former United States Senator and the former chairman of the U.S. Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. He's going to be with us in a very short while. And to remind you, we are streaming live on YouTube. If you want to see this program in all of its glory, just click on YouTube Times Radio channel, and there we will be. Otherwise, just keep listening. We love to have your company. Now it is 4:33. Let's get the news with Laura Cook.
Across the UK, on DAB, online, and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. The White House has accused Amazon of a hostile and political act. It's over claims the online giant was planning to detail the impact of tariffs next to prices on its products. Taxes of at least 10% are being imposed on goods imported into the US. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt wants shoppers to shun the retailer.
This is another reason why Americans should buy American. It's another reason why we are onshoring critical supply chains here at home to shore up our own critical supply chain and boost our own manufacturing.
But Amazon insists there are no plans to list import charges on its main site. A man who was arrested in connection with a crossbow attack in Leeds has died of self-inflicted injuries. 38-year-old Owen Lawrence was detained in connection with the attack in Headingley, in which 2 women were injured. A court's heard the Sycamore Gap tree was cut down in under 3 minutes by 2 men on a moronic mission. Jurors have been shown mobile phone footage of the felling of the Northumberland landmark. Daniel Graham and Adam Correspondents for others deny criminal damage. And Marks & Spencer says it has pockets of limited availability in some stores as it deals with the fallout of a cyber attack. It follows reports of empty food shelves in some branches. And crude oil processing has stopped at the Grangemouth refinery. It's due to shut this year and be turned into an import terminal for fuels. Remember our news podcast on the Times Radio app. Look for the Times News Briefing and the World in 10.
Now, let me just mention a really attractive offer. It's on subscriptions to the Times right now. You get your first 3 months for just £1. And to get that offer, go over to the Times website or the app, and you can look there for the links to subscribe. Here's the thing. The offer ends tomorrow at 5. You're going to need to be quick. Time now. It is 4:37.
Times Radio Business News.
And hello to Robert Miller on the other side of the Atlantic from the Times Business Desk. Hello to you, Robert.
Hello, John. Greetings from London.
Lovely to hear your voice, Robert. What's new in the markets?
Well, we've had a bit of a milestone. The FTSE 100 now coming into the close, up 50 points. That means it's been up 12 days in a row. That's the best winning streak since 2009 in July. Still 5% off its high, but nevertheless, a good day. I mean, the shares in the highlight were Howden Joinery, does kitchen fittings. People will know it. It's had a bounce back. It's been going through a restructuring. So top of the leaderboard today. HSBC up there, good gain, nearly 3%. Lower quarterly profit, but that was expected. But a $3 billion share buyback certainly put the light under their shares. Not such a good day for BP. They had lower quarterly profit. And they're also under pressure from this US activist, Elliott Management, and they've got a 5% stake agitating for change on them. Associated British Foods, we always think, well, it's the Primark owner, and we often forget, or I do, that it has a big sugar division as well. It's not, it's going to have a full year loss, so their shares were down about 9%, quite steep, really. AstraZeneca, one from your side of the pond, they said they're going to invest more money in America, so that's put the shares up. M&S, a rare good day. We were mentioning them just now in the news bulletin after this cyber attack. They're up 1%, but still down 5% since the incident happened. Worth a mention, too, of Mobico. We know it as National Express. It sold last week its those famous yellow school buses in America. The losses last year were $609 million, so their shares were down very steeply. Pound dollar, well, we were near a 3-year high earlier, still 134. Oil actually below $64 a barrel. And gold, I should say, has reached a record 25 times this year, record price. Maybe something to do with tariffs, John.
May well be so. Robert Miller, thank you.
Radio Business News.
So let's talk about foreign affairs as they are perceived from here in Washington, D.C., from here on this side of the Atlantic. So much to talk about. We'll start with this, I guess, which is on the first day of the Trump second term. He promised he'd end the war in Ukraine.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
He said that over and over again. Now, here we are 100 days on with Ukraine and civilian targets in Ukraine continually targeted by Russian missiles. Thousands have been and are being killed on the front line of that war. Let's welcome to the program Ben Cardin, former Democrat senator from Maryland and a former chairman of the United States Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. Hello to you, Senator.
It's good to be with you. Thank you very much.
Good of you to join us. Now, let me ask you first of all, if I can, how would you characterize America's standing in the world now, today, after 100 days of the Trump administration?
It's been a disaster these first 100 days as far as the U.S. leadership globally. America now is questioned as to whether you can trust the United States as a reliable partner. We've seen the United States make concessions to Russia in regards to Ukraine, which is very damaging to our leadership for democratic states. But basically, it's how do you do business with a country where you don't really trust what the president is saying? You don't know whether he is telling you the truth. You don't know whether he's going to be reliable. You don't know what he says today, he will say tomorrow. He seems much more transactional than value-based in the way he does his foreign policy decisions. He insults other countries, what he did with Greenland and what he did with Canada, as far as their sovereignty is concerned. So these first 100 days have really questioned America's leadership in regards to the free world.
But let me just then put, as part of the contrary case to you, Senator, I mean, President Trump, before he was president, he said he wanted to drive NATO partners to really significantly increase their spending and their planning in their own defense and not just piggyback on American taxpayers and American military might. And he succeeded and is succeeded in doing that. And it's long overdue, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I agreed with President Trump during his first term that we needed to have a much stronger commitment from NATO to meet their NATO countries to meet their commitments. Prior to the Trump first administration, there was that commitment to get up to 2%, but there was too slow in reaching that. There's now a question whether 2% is the right percentage or whether it should even be higher. So yes, I agree. There's been a lot of progress made. Most of the NATO countries have really stepped up and are doing a much better job. But the truth is that all countries need to carry their own weight. And it is correct that there are certain countries that are not meeting their obligations.
Right. I mean, considering in my sort of devil's advocate role, do you really imagine that President Trump would actually walk away from Ukraine in the face of this continuing Russian aggression? Because maybe it's part of this deal making, maybe it's part of this art of the deal. And if it drives the two sides in the end to the negotiating table and brings about a ceasefire, would that not vindicate the approach?
But he's setting it up to fail when he says that what Russia's concession is to stop the war, a war that they started that they never should have started, where he starts the conversations to say that Ukraine's going to concede its territory to Russia permanently, where it doesn't really have on the table the necessary security guarantees, where it's questioning Ukraine's sovereign decisions in the future to join NATO. Where there's no conversation about Russia's accountability for the atrocities that they've committed, both the physical damage as well as holding them responsible for war crimes. All that has never been put on the table by the president. He's setting up negotiations to fail. So, no, I don't think this is the right way that we should be working in unity with our coalition. We should make it clear that we're going to support Ukraine military needs as long as it's necessary. And yes, we do want an off-ramp on the act of war, but we want it in a way that Ukraine can achieve its objectives.
Well, if we were talking about President Kamala Harris instead of President Trump, because that might have happened in terms of the popular vote, there was just a whisker between them, but it's not Kamala Harris. If it was Kamala Harris, what would she be doing now to bring this war to an end?
Well, I think I've had several conversations with President Zelensky last year, not this year, and I know that he is very anxious to find a way to end the act of war. So, yes, we were working prior to this election, and whether it was President Harris or President Trump, there was an off-ramp that could have been had here. And we recognize it's in phases. We recognize not everything's going to be achieved, but you don't want to concede sovereignty. You want to make sure there is real security for the borders, and you want to make sure Russia's held accountable for the damages that it's caused. I think in unity, we could have achieved that by making clear to Mr. Putin that we are not going to enter into any type of an agreement until those needs are met.
All right, can I just bring us back just for a moment to American domestic politics, because there's a lot of that going on, a lot of questions and soul-searching going on, as it were, behind the scenes of the big headlines. As a senior Democrat, do you believe that your party now needs a different and more effective person to lead the line than Kamala Harris? Let me ask you that, first of all.
Well, we have a deep bench. It's a long time between now and the next presidential elections. We've got to do everything we can to protect our country. America will be back. There's damage being caused by President Trump, not just in foreign policy, but in domestic policy. We need leaders in our party that can stand up and articulate the challenges we need to face and do what they can to protect our country's values and our economy. We have a lot of leaders that I'm confident will be part of that discussion. I have a great deal of confidence in Vice President Harris, but there's certainly a lot of other people that are on the front lines right now for our party.
All right, Ben Cardin, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us on our program from here in Washington today. Now, coming up, of course, look, on this day of all days, 100 days of the Trump administration, we need to hear from some of those loyal Republicans. We've been out and about, our team, since we've been here, talking to members, among others, of the Berkeley County Republican Club in West Virginia. You can hear what they had to say in just a moment. And after 5, I'm going to be talking to Chuck Todd, who's a former host of the U.S. political TV institution, NBC's Meet the Press. He's going to be with me very shortly. And I'm also going to be talking to the president of the American Association of University Professors. There is something of a battle going on between the White House, the Trump administration, and the elite level of American academia. It is an ideological and culture war which is building to quite a pitch, as you will find in just a moment. Do stay with me. I'm John Pienaar on Times Radio, live from Washington, D.C., in association with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more. Now, we are here in Washington, D.C. for 3 special programs this week, starting today, ending on Thursday. We're marking 100 days, the first 100 days of the Trump administration. As you can imagine, there's an awful lot to talk to you about what's going on here on just about every possible front. And what are they thinking out there in America, beyond Washington, D.C.? Well, to make an attempt at finding out some of that, our team, the Times Radio team, went out to visit the Berkeley County Republican Club just last night and found out what they thought of the president's progress so far.
I'm 120% in support of tariffs. And the reason why is because, here in West Virginia in particular, we've seen, jobs be lost across the board. All throughout, the northern part of this state lies relics and these, empty carcasses of buildings that used to house, industry that used to run pretty much everywhere in the state. I mean, if you go to Martinsburg, you can see a shell of some corporation that everyone moved and congregated around to work and build their lives. And these good paying jobs are gone. I mean, now you're either going to be a lawyer or you're going to be working at Walmart, and there's no in between. The middle class in this country has been hollowed out, and people feel, broken, and that the American dream isn't there for them anymore.
It's about leveling the playing field. So there's a lot of countries right now that as soon as we said that we're going to put tariffs on them, they're willing to come to the table and negotiate. The ones that are not, we're going to continue putting tariffs on them. So eventually, I think that you'll actually see free trade is going to grow because of us being willing to, bring tariffs to the table.
I'm not always 100% for that, but it does. The way he's doing it is leveling the playing field. And I think that the way he's going about it is just going to help us tremendously here in the United States. And it has. It's just ruined our middle class. It's taken things away from the United States. Now, I mean, how many people look and say, made in America? I think that the leveling part is to me the most significant part that he can do. Is everybody's got to be treated the same, and for so long it hasn't been that way. So I'm 110% with it too.
So in general, I'm an advocate of free trade, but I think that Trump is right to recognize that we are being taken advantage of by other countries, particularly China is a economic threat to the United States.
People are already losing jobs. We have a group of steelworkers, in the northern part of our state, thousands of them laid off because there was no tariff relief that was given to the individuals that were, being dumped with cheap Chinese steel. We have people that work in lumber that are being laid off because, people want to go and source their wood from places like Canada instead. I mean, the American economy and the American worker has been forgotten in this country, and Donald Trump is the first person, in this bipartisan consensus that blew that up and said, hey, I am here for the American worker and the people that, actually do the work to industrialize and build this country. And so when you ask me, is there going to be a recession? I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not worried about Wall Street. I'm worried about Main Street.
I understand, there might be effects throughout the world. But again, I'm looking at it through the lens of being an American and putting my country first. And it's not fair for us to hollow out our country in order to, try and look at the interests of other nations. No other nation does that. We're the only country that's done that. We've done that for a lot, especially in the past 30 years. So we're going to put our country first. We're going to bring industry back into our country. We're going to make our economy healthy again. And we're going to start growing our middle class. And that's something I'm absolutely going to continue to support.
Yeah, me too. I just think that for too long, we've been that country that just wants to be everything for everybody, and all the other countries are putting themselves first. And look at what it's gotten us. And like what Alonzo said too, it's like, how many people like middle class, blue class workers are really that concerned with 401k or Wall Street? I mean, they're just trying to struggle every day to make a living and to bring home money to take care of their families. And we've got industries have just gone because of that. So I'm going to support it 100% too. I mean, I just think he knows what he's doing. I trust that. And I continue to pray that it's going to work out and it's going to bring industry back here and get people back to work again and being able to take care of their families.
I think it has to get pretty bad before I say, well, this is not working. Empty store shelves, runaway inflation. I mean, but inflation is already pretty high. Under the Biden regime, we did have quite a bit of inflation.
I think that the global economy might need some restructuring. I know that we've been seeing here in the U.S. that a lot of the products that we're getting that are made overseas, particularly in China, the quality is so poor. To me, that's a huge issue because we're still paying a decent bit for these goods, and here they are being manufactured halfway across the world when there are a lot more sustainable options if things can be produced domestically.
And that was the first in our series of roundtables here in the States. We were hearing there from members of the Berkeley County Republican Club in West Virginia. Now, I want to welcome to the show. Fascinating to hear what our next guest has to say about, well, all sorts of things. Hello and good afternoon to Daniel Richman, who's a Columbia Law professor and a former federal prosecutor. Hello to you, Daniel.
Good to be here. Thanks.
It's good to have you with us. Well, a basic question I think a lot of people are thinking about. Some in the States and more widely are talking rather fearfully of the president challenging and threatening, harming the role of American courts and the power of judges to hold the White House in check. Is that overstating things? Is it really that serious?
Hard to be sure right now. The usual, so many people speak about constitutional crises, but no matter what grievous harm is done to scientists, labs, to immigrants ripped out of their homes without due process, the real question is, do we have, as a legal matter, the resilience to deal with these challenges? And the answer so far is we're not sure. Yes, the president has been saying all sorts of things about judges and threatening impeachment or various forms of retaliation, but the judges haven't bent. They're doing their thing, and I assume they'll continue to do it as cases wind their way up to the Supreme Court. And perhaps there might be some point at which there really is a crisis, but so far, sad to say, this is just the clash between presidential time and legal time.
Yeah, we saw the other day a lower court judge arrested for helping a fugitive migrant in her courtroom to escape arrest. Was that a significant development? I mean, the authorities say that this judge misdirected federal officers and helped the migrant slip away. What is your thoughts on that?
I'd be careful about linking what happened to that judge to Trump's larger attack on the rulings and personalities of judges who really have power over him and his administration. This is, sad to say a similar occurrence happened back in Massachusetts under the first Trump administration, and Trump has made very clear that efforts to obstruct federal agents will be dealt with harshly. That appears.
Right, so let's go then to the very top. Let's go to the top, Professor, of the legal pyramid, the Supreme Court of the United States. That's the ultimate authority. 9 judges on that bench, 3 of them appointed by Trump, 2 firmly conservative in their outlook. I mean, is the Supreme Court's good faith in any doubt as the ultimate guardian of the American Constitution, in your view?
Not yet. I think they've acted in good faith by their lights. Some of them have visions of the president's power under the Constitution that I find outlandish. But I believe those views are held in good faith. They certainly have some support in previous writings of these justices. And I think it's a mistake to question the good faith of judges. They can do horrible harm to the United States while acting in perfect good faith.
Right. And meanwhile, there's something of a battle going on between the administration and law firms in America. Threats of retribution against law firms that had a hand in helping some of those who were the president's political opponents. Is that a serious matter for you?
Yes, I think in the long run, it's a serious matter. Part of the problem is the law firms found it easy to settle because by their calculations, not very much was being asked. And at the same time, it looks like the rule of law is being dealt a body blow because, it looks like lawyers who have taken stands against the president are subject to retaliation. And when serious law firms can be threatened and cave, then lesser people are even more afraid.
All right, Professor Daniel Richman of Columbia University, a pleasure to hear your thoughts on the programme today. We are covering an enormous amount of ground in limited time, and thank you for your contribution to all of that. There's much more coming up here on Times Radio Drive. I'm going to be asking a question, which is rather an intriguing one. This 100 days, it is a moment to look at the way things are. Could it also be a crossroads in the journey of Donald Trump? Might we see changes of course? We'll talk about that and among many other things from Washington, D.C. here on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
It's 5 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar with Times Radio Drive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. on the 100th day of the second Trump administration. And here are the headlines. The White House has accused Amazon of a hostile act over its response to Donald Trump's tariffs. And Trump's first 100 days back in the Oval Office have been hailed the most historic start to a presidency in American history. That, of course, according to the White House Press Secretary, Cardin. And coming up here in D.C., I'll be talking to the Times Washington correspondent Alistair Dorber. He has been watching the election in Canada, which came to a really rather dramatic conclusion. And I'm going to be talking to something of an American media legend. The host of NBC's Meet the Press, Chuck Todd, is joining us live. We're going to be meeting him and more on our trip to West Virginia, where Times Radio team spoke to some MAGA-loving crab shack owners. They told us why they were for him and his tariff policy.
This is Times Radio.
And now the news with Laura Cook.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon. The White House has accused Amazon of a hostile act after reports that the retail giant plans to display the surcharge from US tariffs in the price tag of products on its website. The president about it.
This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years? It's not a surprise because, as Reuters recently wrote, Amazon has partnered with a Chinese propaganda arm. So this is another reason why Americans should buy American.
Carla Sands is a former member of Donald Trump's economic advisory panel, and she told John Pienaar this is a good move.
I'm glad he's going to list it because we can watch the good news, because the good news is we're going to onshore a lot of manufacturing. And it's going to look different than it used to look. We're going to onshore jobs. Right now, President Trump has created 100,000 new jobs, 5,000 new manufacturing jobs. And under Joe Biden, we were losing 6,000 manufacturing jobs a month. This is a new day for America, and it's good.
Amazon have responded saying the idea was considered on the low-cost Amazon Hall store, but never a consideration for the main Amazon site. Meanwhile, the White House has said Donald Trump will sign an executive order to soften the impact of his car tariffs as he marks 100 days in office. It's hoped the move would alleviate some duties on foreign parts in cars manufactured in the US, while importers wouldn't have to pay double tariffs on both cars and the materials used to make them. In other news, a court's heard two men accused of felling the Sycamore Gap tree revelled in their infamy after the act made headlines across the country. The trial of Daniel Graham and Adam Carruthers has begun, with both denying causing criminal damage to the tree and to Hadrian's Wall. Times Radio's Deputy Head of News, Alex Dibble, has more.
As prosecutors laid out their case, they told the court the two friends filmed themselves cutting the tree down in a moronic mission. Jurors were played the video, this 2 minutes and 40 seconds long video, in which you can hear a cracking noise as the tree begins to fall, and then it hits the ground with a gentle thud. The court heard the next day, when the news broke, the men were sending each other message after message, reveling in it, but that now their friendship appears to have unravelled, with each of them blaming the other.
Britain's only publicly acknowledged transgender judge is to challenge ministers in Europe's Human Rights Court over the landmark ruling on biological sex. Victoria McLeod said the Supreme Court had violated her human rights, claiming she's been left with legal nonsense of being two sexes at once. Earlier this month, judges unanimously agreed a woman is defined by biological sex. And Marks & Spencer says it has pockets of limited availability in some stores as it deals with the fallout of a cyber attack attack. It follows reports of empty food shelves in some branches. And remember, our news podcasts are on the Times Radio app. Look for the Times News Briefing and the World in 10.
Across the UK, on DAB Digital Radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker.
John Pienaar on Times Radio Drive with NatWest Cushion.
It is really good to have your company here on Times Radio Drive, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. on the 100th day of the second Trump administration. I'm John Pienaar. So why do we get excited about the 100th day of a new government, or for that matter, a new president? Well, frankly, we generally do it because we can. It is a handy moment to take stock of how everything's going, and it's especially useful when you're looking at a new administration as transformative as Donald Trump's. But here is a thought, just a thought. Might it be that this 100-day landmark might come to be seen as something of a fork in the road, maybe even a crossroads, where President Trump has come face to face with the cost of his politically and economically revolutionary agenda, and where he might, if he chooses, draw back from siding with Vladimir Putin against Ukraine, where he might choose to blunt the edge of his trade war with the world, just change direction on his defining agenda in a way that might hold and rebuild his support among American voters, and maybe avoid his rift with historic allies from widening into an unbridgeable chasm. Of course, it might not, in which case the political and culture war in America goes on, and so does the trade war, with all the consequences for America and for the global economy, and with the strategic balance of the world that we've been discussing and that many have feared since day one. Now, we're going to just peer a bit more deeply into the fog, and we're going to look for answers. We're certainly going to try. I wonder what you are thinking right now. Send me a text, 87222. Start with the word Times. Share your thoughts, or maybe a tweet to @Times Radio. And we are right now streaming live on YouTube. We've gone to an enormous amount of trouble to set up all this kit surrounding me in this corner of Washington, D.C. Be ashamed to waste it. Just have a look at what we're doing as well as a listen. Firstly, let me say hi to my colleague Alistair Dorber, the Washington correspondent for the Times and the Sunday Times. Alistair, lovely to see you.
Hi, John.
Alistair, you are one of those who've been privileged, frankly, to have a front row seat at this redefining moment in history. Just tell me about your thoughts.
It's been non-stop for 100 days. The election last year was the same, and Donald Trump obviously won, was inaugurated on January the 20th, and we haven't stopped since. I think that's deliberate on his part. I think he's tried to fill the vacuum with action. We've had hundreds of executive orders. We've had foreign policy decisions and announcements that we might be expecting on Israel, on Ukraine, but also on things like the Panama Canal and Greenland.
Has anyone kept track or count of these executive orders? I mean, we're used to seeing some presidents sign more of them on the first day of their presidency than others. Normally, it's in just gets into double figures just about. Now, every day is executive order day. It's become a way of governing. In that sense, it is, again, there are so many ways, but this one is another revolutionary example.
It is, and it's a way, I think, that he tries to get his agenda across very, very quickly. Of course, with every stroke of the pen, there's a legal challenge that comes in, and there will be challenges to his executive orders. They don't come in with the usual checks and balances of legislation, and there will be challenges. There are also announcements just on policy without any executive action behind them. They number in the hundreds, and it's quite difficult to unpick exactly what is policy, exactly what he's intending, exactly what is going to end up on the statute.
Well, he's got a team around him who've been working on certainly that aspect of the strategy since well before he got into office. I mean, these things weren't scribbled on the morning that he signed them. But in so many other ways, Alistair, am I completely wrong? I've been completely wrong before, Lord knows. Am I completely wrong that so much of this looks as if it's being made up on the hoof?
I think that would be ungenerous. I think that there is a plan. I think there's a plan, whether it is not, it sort of slows down after this mark of the 100 days, which journalists more than voters like to mark, I think. I think we're going to see an awful lot more. We've still got to see things on foreign policy. Ukraine and Israel, the situation in Gaza aren't resolved. His ambitions for Greenland and the Panama Canal aren't resolved. The minerals deal in Ukraine. He wants to dismantle federal agencies. He wants wants to dismantle the Federal Department of Education.
Yes.
These things are planned.
Yes.
There's a process involved, but we're still a long way from seeing the reality of it.
For sure. But look, one of the big defining areas of this new administration has been the trade war. The tariff war, America versus the world. And we've seen that policy develop just month by month, day by day. 1 minute there's a tariff plan, the next minute it's paused for 90 minutes as a consequence of persuasion inside the White House and the reaction of the markets and the debt markets. And later on there's a concession when it comes to the auto importers and those bringing car parks into America. So it's a triumph for the lobbyists. But again, it speaks of a policy being rather made up as they go along. I mean, tax policy, we're talking a big tax policy here, it's not meant to happen and change day by day.
It's not, and I think you even see Republican voices on the Hill quietly, privately, getting very, very frustrated with the way that particular policy is being conducted. I mean, I think it's fair to say that Donald Trump last night would have liked to have seen a Conservative victory in Canada. Yeah. His trade policy and his attitude towards Canada, I think it's directly led to Mark Carney and the Liberals being re-elected there. Yeah. So on the 20th of January, the Conservatives have a 23-point lead in the polls. Yes. His decision to put himself in the front and centre of Canadian politics, I think, has delivered a victory for the Liberals.
Yeah, and there's the new Canadian leader standing there in his moment of victory, saying he's going to stand against Donald Trump, who he said was trying to break Canada so he could own Canada. This is the most peaceful, friendly nation you could imagine on the doorstep of the United States of America. I don't know about you, Alistair. I mean, I find that stuff as boggling as anything else.
A G7 member, a fellow member of NATO. It's incredible. And I don't think in Donald Trump's even sort of most clear vision thinking, he could have possibly imagined that the tariff policy would have led to that electoral...
Or maybe keep on about how he's going to make Canada the 51st state of the Union. Did he think that was going to go down well with Canada?
Well, exactly. And I think that's the result that we've seen. There's obviously wider chaos with tariffs. I mean, we had the IMF meeting here last week where finance ministers came in their scores to deliver a message. A, the tariff policy is wrong. B, we want a trade deal with you. But also, look at what's happened to the markets. Donald Trump said that he'd make America wealthy again. That was his promise to voters on the economy. He didn't say we'll make America wealthy again, but there might be 12 months, 2 years of pain in between. That wasn't part of the deal. And I think if you look at some of the polling, we had a poll out this morning, just 11% of Americans are happy with the way the economy is progressing. Only a third think they're going to be better off this time last year. There's a real problem for him on the economy, and it's largely, or entirely perhaps, a problem of his own making.
Yeah, very much so, and that has a lot to do the rather steep decline in economic trust among Americans in the administration. That has an awful lot to do with fears of prices going up and the fact that some prices are already going up. It's also, as you say, a matter in the hands of the president. He can decide now if he wants to take some of the edges off that policy. And if he did, you don't have to be a political genius to think there might be a bonus to be gained there when it comes to the American voters who are losing faith. It's not inconceivable we could see a change of heart. Now I'm asking you to read the president's mind, which none of us can do. But what do you think?
Well, I think that as time goes by, I mean, he's already warned. He's refused to rule out the possibility of a recession later this year. As we get closer to the end of next year, when the midterms are upon us, he'll be conscious of the fact that the Republicans have got a very, very narrow lead in the House and in the Senate, leads that he needs, a power in those two institutions he needs in order to get his legislative agenda through. He'll be conscious of the fact that Americans don't vote for parties where that cause damage to the economy. And at the moment, that's what he's doing.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to have you with us here face to face, Alistair. It's so nice to be in the neighbourhood of Pennsylvania Avenue, quite a high end neighbourhood.
It really is.
I have to say. Look, stick around if you can,
Will do.
and we can both talk to our next guest. He's something of a media legend. I do like to butter up guests from time to time. Gets him in the right mood. Chuck Todd, host of NBC's Meet the Press, and we're going to be hearing more from my team, getting out and about the way that we do. We don't waste our time. Reporting from Martinsburg, West Virginia. They've been talking to some, truly MAGA-loving owners of what was the Mother Shuckers Crab Shack. And be careful when you say that. Say that slowly. Time now is 5:30. I'm John Pienaar on Times Radio, live from Washington, D.C., in association with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
The Times at 1, sponsored by Solar with Hive. Every Monday to Thursday afternoon, hear an agenda-setting 1-hour programme hosted by the best talent from the Times and Sunday Times newsroom. Unpacking the day's big talking points with a lunchtime menu of the latest news and the sharpest analysis from the UK and around the world. The Times at 1. Every Monday to Thursday afternoon from 1 on Times Radio, sponsored by Solar with Hive. Find out how you can harness the power of solar at hivehome.com. Hive. Know your power.
I've got a new Samsung Galaxy.
So joining us now in our pop-up studio here in Washington, D.C., big welcome to Chuck Todd, who's a former presenter of NBC's Meet the Press and the host of the podcast, The Chuck Toddcast. Hello to you, Chuck.
How you doing?
Thanks for joining us.
Glad you guys came out here for this.
It's a huge pleasure to be here. I hope you appreciate the plug for your podcast.
I do appreciate it. Yeah, like and subscribe. We're all about this. You guys get a tremendous, you have a tremendous YouTube audience.
Well, that's incredibly kind of you. You can say that in your podcast. Now, let me ask you this, Chuck. Journalist to journalist, or journalist to journalist to journalist, because Alastair is still with us. Look, I get that you got, like all Americans, you got skin in this game. In some ways we've all got skin in this game. It's our world. We all live in it. But we are reporters, and we look at the story, and we try to be dispassionate, when we can, to the extent that we can. This is what a story. What a story, Chuck.
Look, it is. And I think it's interesting. I think both voters and, frankly, many of us in the press corps assumed Trump 2.0 would be familiar if you covered Trump 1.0. And I think the biggest mistake we've all made is treating it that way. This is a brand new administration. Right. This is one we never saw before. The first one, Trump was in charge, but he was surrounded by people who were restrainers.
Yes.
Mike Pence, he was in charge of the transition. Mike Pence made sure there were no RFK Jr. showing up in the health secretary. Mike Pence made sure there were no Tulsi Gabbard showing up at the at Intel. Reince Priebus was the first chief of staff. He had a lot of sort of Washington connections. Susie Wiles does not at all. So this is a very, I think this reminds me of an administration of a brand new president who look like they don't quite know what to do or how to do it. This is the fewest pieces of actual legislation. Yes. I mean, he came into office with Congress in his party's hands. Yes. He's yet to sign any major legislation from them. Instead, he's doing executive orders, most of which will either be overturned by the courts or really do nothing, right? Like they're just sort of, I always say they're press releases with a signature. They're sort of formal press releases. And so it has been, I heard you guys discussing, there's been a lot of motion, but it's like being on a boat that's rocking. You're there's a ton of motion, but you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And we just really, if anything, we've retracted in what he's done with the economy. I think this is the equivalent of the Afghanistan moment for Joe Biden. And the reason I believe the Afghanistan moment was so destructive to his presidency even though it was early on, was voters thought the one thing he had core competence in was foreign affairs. So they never expected his biggest blunder to be on that topic. And when that happened, I think it's why he never recovered. His job approval rating never gets back over 45 because of that, because you're like, whoa, that was your best issue and you messed that up? It means everything else is probably a mess.
Yeah.
Or Donald Trump, what voters believed is that the economy was his best issue.
Right.
That this is what he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And instead, he's cost people money. You can't buy a house right now. You wouldn't put your house on the market. Everything is unstable. Everything is uncertain. And we're probably about a month away from empty shelves. And that's going to be another major moment for the public.
So your money, Chuck, is on a big walk back when it comes to this tariff.
Well, he already has done it, which means the policy is already a failure because the whole point of it is to do what? Bring companies to build factories here. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
These walkbacks, he has handed leverage to every other country because every country now knows what? He's desperate for deals. He has to make a deal. Well, who's got Mr. Art of the deal? Who's got the leverage? He's handed all this leverage. The irony is that when this administration started, he was right. The United States, the world's biggest customer, had a bunch of leverage. He threw it away.
Yeah.
He threw it away by going too big, and now countries are and then he pulls back, so you know he's willing to pull back. So, it's like playing somebody in poker who says, yeah, I'm going to show you all my hands and I'm going to bluff. I'm going to show you all my cards and I'm bluffing. And you're like, I've always joked, I'd love to play poker with Donald Trump because I don't think he's very good at it.
Right. Okay. Listen, look, Chuck, what do I know? Look, I just came through passport control yesterday, but it is not possible.
You're lucky to make it through.
Well, I was kind of relieved.
Right, yeah. I only half joke.
Is it not possible that the president could do a good deal of walking back, and end up in a different place all the same? 10% tariffs, there's no reason to think they're all going to disappear.
Right.
And that is quite a big tax on importers. That's going to make a difference economically. It is going to bring in revenue. You don't have to buy the idea this is going to bring in the kind of money you need to abolish income tax.
Right.
And it is a tax.
Although
it's not a charge on foreign governments.
I think this is something people are missing. I do think if you look at his math, it doesn't add up to give no taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security.
Yeah.
But if he decided to say, hey, let's carve out everybody 200,000 and under, which would cover Social Security recipients, which would cover people who make their income on tips, and try to replace it, I could see him attempting this.
Yeah.
And it might be a way to sell tariffs to a skeptical Republican Party because Alistair's right. The congressional Republicans hate this policy.
Yeah, they do.
Okay, they do not like it at all.
With a certain amount of smart politics, you think some of this can be finessed.
Well, I do, except I do think it's in some ways this is where there's, I think, political incompetence around him. They ordered this the wrong way. Tariffs were always going to be a disruptive force. Give people a tax cut, then disrupt their lives with this. He did it in the reverse, and the irony is this tax cut people aren't going to feel. Because, I mean, look, I've read enough studies. Even if he reversed all course today, there'd still be supply chain issues that would cause problems all the way to Christmas.
You sound as if the midterms, 18 months off, you sound as if it's almost in the bag.
Well, it depends on your definition
for the Democrats.
Of in the bag. The House, yes. The margins are too narrow. Here's how you'll know. If the Senate ever gets in play for the Democrats, because it really isn't. The map is a tough map, and I won't bog down your listeners and viewers here. Our senators go up every, a third of them every 2 years. The third that are up, it's a better Republican map than Democratic map. However, this gets bad enough. He's suddenly handing Democrats opportunities in places like North Carolina, Texas, Iowa, Kansas. I mean, the farm states in particular, they've had a double hit because the first one was the cutting of AID. USAID, as much as it was a soft power thing, was a huge financial asset to our farmers because that's where they sold their excess food. They cut that, and now the reciprocal tariffs are most harmful in our country to our farmers.
Now, this chain of reasoning was exactly what I said a moment ago. This could conceivably be a crossroads, not just a normal symbolic 100 days. It could be a crossroads, honestly.
Yeah, I think the one advantage he's got is that he can reverse some of this stuff. I mean, you talk about supply chain issues until Christmas. That's till Christmas. He's then got another 11 months to the midterms. Unlike Joe Biden, where Afghanistan happened and you can't improve that situation. That happened and it's a disaster, and he can't walk that back. I think it's key who Donald Trump listens to. There are people in the administration who want him to go hard on tariffs, who want him to throttle China, to throttle some of his trading partners, the EU. There are others who are horrified and terrified by what the markets are showing, the value of the dollar and so on and so forth. I think you're right. It is a crossroads. He's got a decision to make. He's got a series of decisions to make. What does he want to do? Is he, he's ruling by diktat at the moment. He's not passing legislation. Is that what he wants to do for the next 4 years? I don't think he's serious about a third one in 2028. I think that's for the birds. But how does he get to 2028? What does he want his legacy to be? And I think he's got a choice to make at around this point.
Before we part, I just want to get both of your thoughts on the subject of Ukraine. That we're talking about tariffs, we're talking about dollars and cents, about pounds and pence. In Ukraine, we're talking about lives here. And again, we seem to be maybe at a crossroad point here. Did that sit down, that strange looking sit down in the St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican the other day, did that actually mean very much? I don't know. Do you? And you don't know. Do you have a sense there? What do you think?
The fact that he publicly scolded Putin, and the fact we don't see that very often.
He's done that before.
This was the most we've seen. It's interesting. You got to give Macron and Starmer credit, right? They both worked this hard at the Pope's funeral, and it was Macron that set up those chairs, and made that face-to-face happen. But the fact is, this is more proof that whoever's got Donald Trump's ear last sometimes can have the most impact. And Zelensky and Macron had Trump's ears last, and suddenly he's now blaming Putin for not wanting to come to the table.
Who'll have his ear next? Look, last one. As a figure from the US media, I've got to ask you, you hear all the time this complaint from the Republican side of the aisle in public opinion as well as in politics, how the US media is just so biased against their side that they've sacrificed a lot of credibility and trust. Is there anything to be said for that? Does the let's call it the mainstream media?
What is
kind of part
I
of
always
it,
tell people.
But do they have something to answer for here?
I think the issue is we're just super fragmented. And I do think that a lot of traditional media outlets hired way too many professional politicians to look like anchors. Like, I think that was, having a former member of Congress be one of the lead anchors for a morning show for one of the cable news channels is not a good look. We've seen how Fox is really sort of part of the, I actually think you have.
But they've all done it, Chuck.
Correct. And I think what it has done is it has broken trust with everybody, right? So the right says, well, look at those guys. And then the left says, well, look at those guys. But I'll tell you the real problem in our country with our information ecosystem is we gutted local news. And the gutting of local news, and there's a variety of reasons that happened, that is what made people distrust media. Because national media, we're far away.
Yeah.
Local media is right there. If you don't know your local journalist, you know somebody who maybe goes to school with the kid of the journalist or something like that. The gutting of local news in this country is why I think there's been such a partisan move in the national media. And I think I think we got a lot of work to do. But national media can't fix it on its own.
Yeah,
we got to replenish local.
We've seen something of that hollowing out of local news in our country too, in the United Kingdom.
Yeah, well, classified advertising was a elegant way to fund local news until it wasn't.
All right, Chuck Todd, such a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Alistair, great to see you, mate. We'll see you again very soon.
Tomorrow.
Before you know it. When we got a hook into you, Alistair, we do not let you go.
I am fully aware of that.
Now it is time for more from my team here who have been visiting Martinsburg in West Virginia. They were talking to the owners of the MAGA-friendly Crab Shack. Mother Shuckers. It's Jackie and Christopher.
We've been here for 20 years. Just good Maryland seafood, quality seafood. I guess it just started with our political values and people knew about it and they just started buying us stuff and it just kind of snowballed from there. And
a good 65% of the stuff is from customers.
So, yeah, that like-minded customers that come in the restaurant. My first vote was for a businessman, so when he came down that elevator for the first time in 2015, I was on board.
America first, drill, baby, drill. I mean, all that it's we want to be able to control our own future like pretty much anybody else. The economy is definitely a big part of it. It's a huge part.
The economy for the last 4 years has been awful. I mean, we've still managed to maintain, but it's because we kind of took sides.
And fortunately, we've done very well.
Yeah, but it's based on the fact that we took sides, and we're on the Trump side, and there's a lot of like-minded people around here that I get a lot of older customers that come in and they're just so excited that they're able to wear their Trump clothes and their MAGA hat and all kinds of stuff like that, and they don't feel threatened. They can walk through the door wearing whatever they want, talk about politics at the table, where they don't generally do that at every restaurant.
We haven't really felt any impact because of tariffs as of yet. There are several that bother me, but they were cleaned up pretty much the first week or two. Like there were tariffs on Canadian snow crab, there's tariffs on Venezuelan stuff. There's a lot of seafood that comes from different areas.
Of course, we don't use the Chinese stuff. But
we attempt to get everything and source everything local, but when we can't, we have to get from other places. And the stuff that we get from other places were to be affected, but they cleaned them up so quickly that they're not, as of right now.
The voice there of a rather fed-up business owner in Martinburg. Now, coming up, I'm going to be talking to our very own Times policy editor and get his analysis from the Westminster side of the pond on 100 days of Trump and what that has meant to politics at Westminster. I'm also going to be talking to a former director of the National Security Council under Obama about how the second term of Trump has shaken up the world order, because it has done that. Now, we're now still streaming on YouTube if you want to have a look in and see and listen at the same time. It is now 5:30, so time for the news with Laura Cook.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
John, thank you. Good afternoon. The White House has reacted furiously to reports Amazon's planning to list import charges next to prices on its website. Donald Trump's imposed sweeping tariffs on goods imported into the US. Critics say it'll push up prices for American shoppers. Amazon says the idea was never approved and isn't going to happen. But the president's spokesperson, Caroline Levitt, was quick to attack the retailer.
This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years?
The suspect involved in a crossbow attack in Leeds at the weekend has died as a result of self-inflicted injuries. Owen Lawrence was arrested by police in connection with the incident in Headingley on Saturday, in which 2 women were injured. A jury's heard 2 men embarked on a moronic mission to cut down the famous Sycamore Gap tree in Northumberland. Daniel Graham and Adam Carruthers both deny criminal damage. A paramedic who was detained after an Israeli attack that killed 15 medics in southern Gaza has been released. Assad al-Nasrallah went missing near the city of Rafah on the 23rd of March. And Marks & Spencer has told shoppers it has pockets of limited availability in some stores as it deals with the fallout from a cyber attack. There had been reports of empty shelves in some of its supermarkets. And remember, our news podcasts are on the Times Radio app. Look for the Times News Briefing and the World in 10.
Time now then to check in with Oliver Wright, the Times policy editor, back in London. Hello to you, Oliver.
Hello.
Oliver, I know you've been watching closely the dramatic election in Canada, and we saw the new Prime Minister. He sent out that message of pure defiance to Donald Trump. This coming from the friendliest, the least belligerent country. I think there's a global index of peaceful countries, and Canada's certainly up there in the top 10. Thing is that clearly Carney was speaking for an awful lot of Canadians, wasn't he?
He was. And I think Carney's remarks will be looked on pretty closely in London. Before he was elected, Carney had very good relations with Labour, both in opposition and in government. And I think people in Downing Street will be looking very closely at the way in which Carney is reacting to Trump. And it's obviously a very different way than Sir Keir Starmer has decided to treat him up until now.
And I wonder what the lesson there, if you are in Downing Street and you're watching Mark Carney, who's taken this rather more warlike stance, obviously not in a literal sense, what is there to learn from that inside Downing Street, do you reckon, Oliver?
I think at the moment they will carry on with the current strategy. They very badly want to get this American trade deal over the line before an EU summit on May the 19th, which is going to be the big reset with the European Union. And people in government are concerned that if they don't get the trade deal with Trump struck before that date, then the sort of optics of Britain's reset with the EU could alienate Trump and those around him and make it much harder to get that trade deal over the line. But if it looks like Trump and the administration is not prepared to offer the UK a trade deal, then, domestic politics intervenes. And I think you may see a sort of hardening of the rhetoric towards Washington. I don't think you'll see anywhere near the kind of rhetoric you're hearing from Carney. But, clearly what the Canadian election demonstrates is, that voters, in countries like Canada and probably the UK as well, are sympathetic towards those kind of arguments.
Yeah, you've got to say, Oliver, Hugh Grant's got a lot to answer for, hasn't he? His example in that movie, Love Actually, he set the bar so high no Prime Minister could ever meet it.
Right.
Yeah. One thing that I'm kind of baffled by, which is, from what we can see, and I know we can see a limited amount, but from what we can see, Donald Trump was rather taken by surprise by the strength of feeling in Canada against what he had to say constantly about and against Canada. Now, it seems to me, in my innocence, that anyone could have foreseen that reaction, which tells me that he just didn't think it through. Or maybe he thought it was worth it, which to me is even more baffling. And what could he have had to gain from this sort of, belligerent rhetoric against his neighbour in Canada?
No, absolutely. I mean, clearly there is, the trade argument, which people around Trump would have some validity. But, he went much, much further. But, it's not just Canada. Look at Trump's words about, for example, Greenland, albeit a much smaller country. But, I think you can see from, the first 100 days of Trump, really, that a lot of what he says is not grounded necessarily in the way in which people will react to it. There are things that he believes, and he says the things that he believes, regardless, frankly, of the results of what he says.
Yeah, look, give me your review. I mean, you're a pretty seasoned observer of these things, Ollie. Look, the way that Keir Starmer has been handling this Trump relationship, what sort of marks out of 10 do you give him for that, and why?
I think I would give him quite a high score, really. I'd say, 7 out of 10. Now, that is not the same thing as saying that the strategy is going to be effective. And I think if you talk to people privately in Downing Street, they would acknowledge that Trump is mercurial. They don't know what he's going to do. And across a whole range of policy areas which are of vital importance to the UK, trade, Ukraine, climate change, to name just a few, they are realistic about the extent to which they can influence Trump and his advisors. But, what is the counterfactual? If Starmer had come out there and railed against Trump, would that actually have been in the UK's national interest? I think certainly, senior people in Downing Street said that it wouldn't. Yes. And they would also say that what Starmer has tried not to do is to be too deferential to Trump. He has made his points both in public and in private. He has been reasonably clear where, he believes that the UK is in a different place and thinks different things. He has been careful to maintain his independence while, trying to keep the transatlantic relationship going.
And what about that visit, the Starmer visit to the UK, expected, I think, maybe sometime in September? I mean, you know, I pounded the Westminster beat myself for a good long time. Occasionally, you know, talk to people I talked to back then. And last I heard, really quite recently, Ollie, was there's no state visit coming at all. It's going to be much more like a sort of, you know, a private visit between the president and the king. So, among other things, no address to both houses of Parliament, and all the kerfuffle around that is a bit of fuss about nothing. It turns out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it will carry on being a fuss about nothing for some kind of time. Of course, you know, state visits come in many guises, as it were. Yeah, it was an important piece of diplomacy for the first, you know, Starmer-Trump meeting in the White House, but exactly what it looks like on the ground could be a very different thing.
All right, really great to talk to you, Oliver. Thank you so much. Oliver Wright there from the Times, policy editor. They're back in London. Now let's talk about foreign policy, American foreign policy, which is a pretty general full-time occupation, wondering where that is going, with all the implications that it has got pretty much for all of us. I can get the thoughts now of Charles Kupchan, who's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, but who also served as a senior director for National Security Council under President Obama. Good afternoon to you, Charles.
Hi, John. Good to be back with you.
Right, I'm going to start with Ukraine. It's lovely to have you with us. There seems to have been some hopes raised, you know, back when Donald Trump's, well, it depends on what you mean by hope, could stop the Russia invasion of Ukraine quickly. Well, that didn't quite work out according to those hopes. Alexander Kara was previously an advisor to the Ukrainian defense minister and was less optimistic.
Many Ukrainians hoped that he would proceed from the position of strength by imposing additional costs on Russia because its aggression against Ukraine, strengthening Ukraine's defense capabilities, and trying to negotiate just and lasting peace for Ukraine. Unfortunately, it didn't come true. Vice versa, the Trump administration disregards the key national interests of Ukraine, saying that Ukraine will not be able to recover its internationally recognized borders. Moreover, Donald Trump considers a legal recognition of the illegally annexed Crimea, which would not only constitute the break with the long-standing U.S. diplomatic tradition not to recognize the violent change of borders, but would undermine the key pillars of international law relating sovereignty and territorial integrity. The Trump administration is not interested in providing Ukraine with any security guarantees. Donald Trump ruled out any possibility of Ukraine to become a NATO member in the future. Neither the Trump administration is interested in providing security assistance to Ukraine beyond the one that was voted by the previous Congress and allocated by the previous president. The Trump administration and Trump himself blamed Ukraine for starting this war back in 2022. So we are not happy with the course of action of this administration. We believe that the Russians are not ready to stop this war while they have such an ally, de facto ally in Washington.
Right. I mean, obviously, an enormous amount of skepticism, to put it mildly, about Russia's intentions. Hard to argue that that's justified. But Charles, I mean, you're a former advisor to the former president, Barack Obama. And Donald Trump, he never addresses this subject, either when he speaks or when he posts on social media, which he does an awful lot, without saying, look, Barack Obama was there when the Russians moved into Crimea and nobody lifted a finger. He blames Obama. He blames the response then. How do you answer that, Charles?
Well, you know, Trump blames anything that he doesn't like on somebody else, whether it's Barack Obama or Joe Biden or the president of Mexico or the prime minister of Canada. So I would take that with a grain of salt. But I do believe that Trump has done the right thing by reaching out to Putin. This is a war that Ukraine's not going to win. I think Biden should have tried to negotiate with the Russians when he was still in office. And as a consequence, Trump is picking up the slack, and he's started a dialogue with the Russians that needs to take place. And I also think that Trump is doing the right thing by recognizing that Ukraine, at least for now, is not going to get back those parts of Ukraine occupied by Russia. But other than that, it's been a mess from the get-go. The problem is that Trump has an instinct, an impulse to end the war, but he doesn't have a plan. And that's why this rollout of his effort has been such a mess.
But was it within the power of Joe Biden then to do more to stop this developing into what we see now, the full-blown invasion of Ukraine? Could that have been nipped in the bud?
Well, could it have been prevented through diplomacy? We'll never know. I don't know what went on behind the scenes between the United States and Russia in late 2021. My guess is it probably was not stoppable because Putin made clear that he had vast war aims, including subjugating Ukraine and rolling back the post-Cold War order. But I do think that Biden should have tried some point during his final 2 years to bring this war to an end when Ukraine was in a stronger position. It would have had a more leverage at the negotiating table. Instead, what we see now is the Russians are gaining ground. Trump is undercutting Zelensky by screaming at him in the Oval Office when he needs to be supporting Zelensky to increase his leverage. So, I'm sort of cautiously hopeful that we may get to the finish line and that we may get an agreement, but it is not being handled well by the Trump administration.
Okay, in a nutshell then, because you're not the only one saying this, you think there's at least a possibility, maybe even a fair possibility, that we will end up in an agreement in Ukraine. What is that going to look like? What are going to be the terms of that broadly?
Well, I think we know one half of the agreement, and that is that you freeze the front line where it is on the day that the agreement is reached, that the 20% of Ukraine that is occupied by Russia will for now stay under Russian occupation. What we don't see, because nobody's really been speaking about it, is what happens to the 80% of Ukraine that is free, that is still controlled by Kyiv. And I think that's what we need to know more about, because the key is if that 80% of Ukraine can emerge as a success story, gets continued aid from the US and Europe, turns into a stable, defensible, secure, prosperous Ukraine, I would call that a success story, because it would end the war on terms that leaves Ukraine, even though with only 80% of its territory, free and able to make decisions about its future.
And many people would say that would be a desirable outcome. It would also need, wouldn't it, for President Trump to do and say what he has not done or said so far, which is that America would be there giving a security guarantee to try and to preserve the integrity of free Ukraine in the shape that it's in when the ceasefire comes about. So far, Donald Trump doesn't seem to be there. The best that he's offering is a deal on minerals, which he seems to be arguing would be as good as a security guarantee. Arguably, it would not. Can you see the president giving that ground, that final crucial piece of ground, Charles, coming as you do from the other side of the aisle?
I can't see Trump extending a security guarantee, nor do I think he should. I think for now, Ukraine has a path to EU membership, but not a path to NATO membership. But I do think that Trump has to come out and say, Mr. Putin, you need to understand that if we're going to get an agreement here, it's hands off the rest of Ukraine. You don't have a veto over the size of Ukraine's armed forces. You don't have a veto on the future flow of American assistance to Ukraine. You get to keep for now what you have, but you need to understand that the rest of Ukraine is gone for good. Is Trump going to come out and say that either publicly or privately? I doubt it, but it's overdue.
All right. And it's been good to get your thoughts, Charles. Thank you. Charles Kupchan there, who was a senior director for the National Security Council under President Barack Obama. Now, Times Radio is going to be back with Kate McCann and Stig Abel from 6 as always. You're going to be getting a packed show there and hearing from, among others, the leader of Reform UK. Times Radio's Theo Usherwood travelled to Scunthorpe today and spoke to Nigel Farage.
We are recalibrating politics in the most extraordinary way.
And you think you can become Prime Minister and you will be able to, Reform MPs will be able to hold a majority in the House of Commons?
I think it's possible, and that's why this Thursday matters so much. This is our first major hurdle since the general election. All right, you may say to me, you're sounding very bullish about this. Well, you know, we see the top of the mountain and we intend to climb it. And frankly...
And that includes Runcorn and Helsby?
Well, let's see what happens. I mean, it's Labour's 16th safest seat in the country. All I can tell you, every time I go back, I feel the gap with Labour's closing. So I think we're in with a real chance.
And you can hear that full interview tomorrow from 6 on Times Radio Breakfast. Now, coming up in a moment, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that the elite universities here in the United States, the Ivy League universities, they're called, are getting together and forming what's being called a collective to resist pressure from the Trump administration. I'm going to be talking live to the president of the American Association of University Professors in just a moment. I'm John Pienaar here on Times Radio, live from Washington, D.C. We're in association with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more. Now, do you remember, tune in tomorrow to Times Radio, as ever, at midday, Prime Minister's Questions. You get it live here on Times Radio. Hugo Rifkind in the chair, alongside Tim Shipman and the comedian Alistair Barry. They're going to be giving it the treatment they always give it, pausing the action, analysing the exchanges for you as it goes along in real time. So it's PMQ's Unpacked. It's exclusive right here on Times Radio, and you get it tomorrow at midday. Now, though, we're seeing now everywhere it is reported, and we can see in front of our eyes here in the United States, the administration of Donald Trump has declared something of a cultural and ideological battle against the most elite universities in this country. We can talk to Todd Wolfson, who's president of the American Association of University Professors. Good afternoon to you, Todd. Todd Wolfson, are you with us?
I'm so sorry. Thanks for having me, John.
You're very, very, very welcome. So, look, Todd, so the headlines, many of them, which tell us that there's something of a battle brewing, more than brewing, it's well underway between the Trump administration and some of America's most high prestige universities. Is that what's going on? And is it true, as reported, that some of those universities are getting together quietly and planning, well, a bit of joint resistance?
Actually, the Trump administration's attack is on the entirety of our higher education system. What they're doing is making it look like it's an attack on only the elite universities, Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, Cornell. But what they're doing is obliterating the entire higher education system and using the elite universities as their foil. And so
obliterating the entire university system is a very big charge. I mean, can you support that? Can you explain that?
Yeah, well, let's start with the first and most substantial attack, which is on our biomedical research infrastructure. $40 billion a year comes from the NIH, National Institute of Health, to fund biomedical research in our universities that is critical to the health of every single American, whether we need critical therapies around cancer or Alzheimer's or heart disease or diabetes. They have cut that in at least half at this point in time. So last year at this point, about $7 billion had been given out to the universities to do this biomedical research. At this point, it's under $3 billion. It is a wholesale destruction of our biomedical research infrastructure, which not only impacts the U.S. health, but the health of the entire country.
So forgive my innocence then. Forgive my innocence. Why would this government or any government, Todd, threaten that kind of vital biomedical research, which is so important to the fight against illness?
I mean, to me, there's only three ways that we can understand this. One, first and foremost, is that there's a part of Donald Trump's MAGA community that's anti-science. And so at one level, they're feeding their base red meat. But then at another level, what we think they want to do is privatize the research infrastructure, hand it out to pharmaceutical companies. And so move what was something that was done by our universities and move it into the corporate world. And that will not work. Let me be really clear, because most of the research that these universities do is underlying critical foundational research, which then leads to the kind of research that has breakthroughs, whether it's a new drug or like Ozempic or something else. But if you don't do the underlying research, which doesn't have the same return on investment, you won't get those breakthroughs. So we think it's either feeding the base and also trying to privatize the research. And I think third is scoop up some loose change for tax cuts for billionaires.
All right, look, so away from that scientific front, what about the cultural questions? Is there anything to be said, in as far as one can be objective about this thing, is there anything to be said for the accusations that these universities, especially, if not exclusively, but especially the most prestigious university, are so dominated by a kind of, liberal mindset that conservative points of view don't get adequately represented? That is part of the argument, as you know very, very well. Is there anything to be said for that, Todd?
I mean, look, universities, the way they operate, people who are doing the best, most exciting research that has the most strongest evidence in any field, whether you're an anthropologist like me or a sociologist or a physicist or a STEM engineer or a computer scientist. It's the people whose work is the best that rise to the top, that get the jobs, and then they move forward in their careers. It's a meritocracy like anything else. The reality is that the conservative scholarship hasn't been as strong. And so we don't see the same kind of scholars emerging with the same strong research programs. And so, yes, there is less of a right wing bent within the academy. That's true. But I don't think that's because there's an ideological leaning towards liberalism. I think it's because of the scholarship that's emerging, frankly.
If there's to be a kind of joint front, between these universities, determined to strengthen numbers, if you like, what are the steps that are then open to that resistance group? What can they do? Are they going to fight in the courts? And if they are, on what basis?
Yeah, I mean, well, first I want to say this to you, that the faculty and staff and students at the universities have started the fight, and the universities are now following, right? And so, we have 50,000 members. We've been out in the streets fighting over the NIH cuts I described earlier. We've been out in the streets fighting over the encroachment on institutional autonomy and political interference from the Trump administration. We've had multiple days of action. We've also sued the Trump administration 5 times around different incursions. Now, finally, our universities and the leaders of our universities are following the workers in our universities, the faculty, staff, and students, and beginning to stand up to them. And so what does that look like? I think first and foremost, there'll be legal cases that emerge, and those legal cases will push back on Trump's interference in our institutional autonomy. I think there'll be pushback around his orders around DEI. I think there'll be pushbacks around the orders focused on the cuts to our biomedical research. So I think we'll see a lot of different ways we're going to fight back, and our colleges will.
Yeah. All right. Very, very briefly, is this a war that you universities think you can win?
Not alone. We will be aligning ourselves with other sectors in society, federal workers, pre-K-12 workers, and together we will fight. We will build an agenda for all Americans that shows the bankrupt nature of the Trump administration.
Okay, and we will, I guess, be watching that among so many other things. Todd Wolfson of the American Association of University Professors, thank you so much. More coming up on Pienaar and Friends. We are here in Washington, D.C. You are there. We've got a lot to talk about. Stay with us on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
I'm John Pienaar. It is 6 o'clock. Welcome to Pienaar and
John, thank you. Good evening. Donald Trump's administration has accused online giant Amazon of planning a hostile act over reports it was proposing to list tariffs next to its products on its website. But the retailer insists giving the price breakdowns was never under consideration for its main site. But the president's spokesperson, Caroline Leavitt, was quick to attack the retailer.
This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years?
Carla Sands is a former member of Donald Trump's economic advisory panel and told John Pienaar this is a good move.
I'm glad he's going to list it because we can watch the good news, because the good news is we're going to onshore a lot of manufacturing. And it's going to look different than it used to look. We're going to onshore jobs. Right now, President Trump has created 100,000 new jobs, 5,000 new manufacturing jobs. And under Joe Biden, we were losing 6,000 manufacturing jobs a month. This is a new day for America, and it's good.
Meanwhile, the White House has said Donald Trump will sign an executive order to soften the impact of its car tariffs as he marks 100 days in office. It's hoped the move would alleviate some duties on foreign parts in cars manufactured in the United States, while importers wouldn't have to pay double tariffs on both cars and the materials used to make them. Anti-terror police say they're continuing to investigate a crossbow attack in Leeds, despite the death of a man suspected of carrying it out. 38-year-old Owen Lawrence died in hospital from self-inflicted injuries. He lived near the scene in Headingley, where two women suffered serious injuries on Saturday. The trial of two men accused of cutting down the Sycamore Gap tree's been told they filmed themselves felling it. Prosecutors say Daniel Graham and Adam Carruthers drove from Carlisle to the Northumberland beauty spot on a moronic mission. They deny criminal damage. Specialists are calling for men to be allowed to carry out breast cancer screenings because of staff shortages. Currently, mammograms are the only procedures which are carried out exclusively by female staff. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch is opposing the idea.
I think the solution is to get more radiographers, not to ask women yet again to sacrifice their privacy and dignity to deal with a supply issue.
And the operator of Spain's national grid says a major power outage began when there was a generation loss in the southwest of the country. Millions of people there and in Portugal were hit by the blackout. Electricity has been restored to most areas, but energy experts say a reliance on net zero energy left the countries vulnerable, something Andy Mayer, an energy analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs, agrees with.
The analogy to use is the one that the climate doomsters use, which is that of the boiled frog. Each additional solar farm on the grid isn't necessarily going to cause the problem, but the aggregation of all of them together puts us in a very dangerous situation.
And remember, our news podcasts are on the Times Radio app. Look for the Times News Briefing and the World in 10.
It is great to have you with us here on Pienaar and Friends, coming to you live from Washington, D.C., just over the road from the White House on this beautiful spring Washington day. Ahead of us, an hour of good conversation and good company from both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. It's different in that way to normal. So we've got two friends for half an hour, two more friends in the other half hour, and it's going to be a delight to talk to all of them, because it always is. First of all, hi to Rachel Cunliffe, the Associate Editor at the New Statesman. Hello to you, Rachel.
Hello, John.
Hi, and Tim Montgomery back with us, veteran commentator and supporter of Reform UK. Hello to you, Tim.
Well, hi, John. But first of all, veteran makes me feel really old, so you've upset me. But I am in your seat in the studio, so I feel a man of enormous power sat where you normally sit. So be aware. Yeah. I may lose control with the feeling of influence that I can't have.
I'll tell you, look, the fact that I describe you as a veteran, it gives you license to sit where you like. So there's no need to worry about that. I'm going to come to you first, Tim, in my seat. What is your thought for the day?
Well, I'm going to have a bit of a moan, I'm afraid, John. But actually, the last news report I've just heard on Times Radio did actually mention it finally. But it's been pretty obvious for 24 hours that the situation, the outage we've seen in Spain and Portugal, has been connected with the fact that the renewable energy supply industry is at the heart of this crisis. It just doesn't have the baseload certainty that the traditional fuels have. And yet both Times Radio and the BBC have been incredibly reluctant to admit this. In the same way, when there's ever a weather event, there's a rush to say, well, this is probably climate change. And I just think that, one of the issues that you've been covering incredibly well from Washington is just, why do people trust Trump, when he has a sort of unreliable relationship with the truth, let's put it that way. And one of the reasons is, I think, is the mainstream media is very slow to sometimes admit some of the balances of interest that they have, are complicated. And I do think the mainstream media has been incredibly slow to acknowledge renewable energy may be a good thing overall, but it has some real downsides. And we've seen that downside incredibly dramatically in Iberia in the last 24 hours. And I think when the mainstream media sort of shies away from dealing with these subjects, that's when you sort of open the door to politicians that some people might regard as fringe politicians.
Rachel, do you see any force in Tim's argument there? Do tell me.
I think it's important that journalists try and get things right. And we've seen in the past the dangers in putting out theories about things that have happened, about whether they're disasters like the energy shortages, or if it's a crime that's occurred. The first message, the first narrative, the first story often has inaccuracies in it. And if it turns out that somewhere like the BBC or Times Radio puts out a report of what they initially think might have happened, and it subsequently turns out that there are errors in that because they didn't have all the information within hours, that affects trust in the media too, because people go, oh, you can't believe anything they say because they said this one thing on day one and then they said this other thing on day two or whatever. And I think it's really important actually to try and wait for as much certainty as you can get. And it may be that the theories with the energy shortage, the electricity outage in Spain and Portugal, the theories that were out there on day one are correct. It may be that they're not correct. I don't know, I'm not an energy expert, but I think waiting until there's more evidence than a couple of people on Twitter think it might be is actually really important.
It's a little bit more than a couple of people on Twitter. And for once, I think you are being a little bit disingenuous, Rachel. I think the media has a bias. It has a bias to say almost immediately that climate change is a part of a weather event. And the number of experts, the number of people who understand the energy industry have been saying this for a long time, well, the last 24 hours. It's only now that the Times Radio and the BBC are picking up on it. This is what breeds cynicism about journalism.
Well, I think it would also breed cynicism about journalism if reports were put out that subsequently proved to be factually inaccurate. And I think if that were the case... You can mention them, which you normally do on climate change, without saying they're true. That's the difference. I think if that were the case, you would be one of the first people to be out there going, the BBC published this report that turned out to be full of inaccuracies.
Well, they're happy to do it on some occasions and not on others. That's the problem, it's the inconsistency.
All right, you've aired your thought very, very eloquently, Tim. I'm gonna ask Rachel now for your thought for the day, Rachel.
I've got a really fun one because I thought the rest of the programme might be quite heavy, and I kind of want to use my thought for the day as a public service announcement for anyone out there dating. There was a report in the Times yesterday about Gen Z not enjoying going out for drinks when it comes to dates and preferring dinner. Firstly, I think it's very funny that Gen Z thinks that they've invented the concept of the dinner date. It's always really quite fun when young people think that they have created something that has been around for some time. I remember when one of David Beckham's kids, I can't remember which one, seemed to imply that he'd invented the concept of double-barrelling surnames on marriage. But my public service announcement is, whether you're Gen Z or any other age, do not go out for dinner as a first date. It is a terrible idea. It is a significant time investment, and it's a time investment where all you're going to do is sit across from one another and stare at each other awkwardly, and it is much, much better to pick something low stakes, ideally something where you are doing something together, even if that's just going for a walk, rather than being in this very high pressure environment where you're kind of stuck there for, at a minimum, an hour and a half. So please, if you read that report, do not listen to the young people. They do not know what they are talking about. Don't go out for dinner as a first date.
I've got to say, guys, that my experience of dating, which is by no means yesterday or the day before yesterday, quite often used to involve out for dinner. At the end of the week on a date, and those visits I now dimly remember. Those visits to the Wimpy Bar on a Friday night, they were incredibly romantic and glamorous. What do you think about this, Tim? You've got memories of your early dating days and the merits or otherwise of a dinner date?
I may actually have a date this evening. It's possible.
Oh, good Lord.
But I think I'll stop at that point and not say any further. But and it is a dinner date, though.
Is it a first date, though?
It's complicated, and I think I've probably said too much.
No, because I think it's the first meeting. It's the pressure of a dinner date for the first one that is the issue here.
We've met in quite different circumstances quite a number of times, so I kind of know them very well. But this is the first time we're actually having a date.
Okay, well, next week you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, I think you're probably right, but I am doing a dinner date tonight.
Good luck.
Thank you.
I've got to say, good luck. Good luck with that, Tim. I've got to say, one of the reasons I love having you on this show, which I most absolutely do, is your wonderful habit of thinking out loud into a live microphone in a way that so many people just don't do.
Yeah.
It is a
I'm not sure it's wise, particularly that you enjoy it. That's beginning to worry me.
All right. Look, should we talk about 100 days of Donald Trump? We've had a lot of conversation on this show. First of three this week. So many of them really rather interesting. Look, just a sample of one or two. I spoke to Carla Sands, the former U.S. ambassador to Denmark in 2017, former member of Trump's economic advisory panel. She had this to say.
I'm just happy because it's a beautiful spring day, but it's also Trump's 100th day anniversary of him ushering in the glorious golden age for America.
Have you plans to celebrate today? Are you partying or anything of that kind?
John, every day is Christmas.
Every day is a party
since
time.
President Trump was elected.
Well, there's a very happy Trumpite there. I also spoke to Bruno Waterfield, the Times Brussels correspondent, who gave us this perspective from the other side of the water.
It's been something of a revolution. It's very hard now to believe that since February, on a continent that moves rather glacially politically on the whole, since February, the EU has set up a 150 billion euro rearmament fund funded out of national government contributions to Brussels. Is setting up a rearmament bank. There's a coalition of the willing, led by Britain and France, to send effectively to underscore with security guarantees any future settlements in Ukraine. NATO is on the back seat. The future of NATO is very, very uncertain. Will there be an American general commanding it? After doing all that's happened in a few weeks, and that is a real revolution.
So, I mean, not pulling any punches there. And how can you really dispute any word of that? I mean, if you do dispute any word of that, I really want to know what you're thinking. Send me a text, send me a tweet. We're going to get the thoughts of Rachel and Tim on 100 days of Donald Trump in just a moment. This is Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. in association with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more. Pienaar and friends coming to you live from Washington, D.C., just over the road from the White House, and back home in our London studio, Rachel Cunliffe and Tim Montgomery. So, Tim, 100 days of Donald Trump. I'm not going to pry any further into any more details of your date this evening, but I do wonder, are you going to be raising a glass to Donald Trump on this 100th day, Tim?
Probably not, actually. As I've sort of...
Oh, really?
As I've sort of communicated, I think last week was my first week back from a little period away. And I'm sort of incredibly tortured about Donald Trump now. And there's so much... the first month, I think I was in the studio and we to and froed a little bit more, Rachel and I, on all of this. And I was more willing to sort of defend Trump. And some of the first stuff he did on a much more sensible policy, I think, on net zero, getting rid of the sort of intensive diversity management of the American public sector, where sort of your skin colour or your gender seemed to matter more than anything else in whether you got on. Lots of things on trans that Trump did. There was lots of reasons why I voted or would have voted for Trump as an American, why I supported him. But as I said last week, the tariffs announcement was just so stupid, so self-harming. I had a lot of admiration for his willingness to end the war in Ukraine. You know, thousands of people are dying in that war, which basically has a sort of World War I quality to it, no progress. That he wanted to end it was good, but seeming to end it on Russia's terms, this is becoming more and more. Yeah. So I'm afraid I do not know how I would vote now if there was a US election. And, yeah, I feel very let down, really, by him. And but, you know, I'm hoping there will be more of the first few days than the last few weeks to come.
Yeah, well, again, Tim, and I genuinely appreciate your frankness, because you're telling us more than you did last week. I'm sure you must be aware. Last week we had a kind of precursor to this conversation, and you said, you know, you were really disillusioned with the president's handling of global tariffs, but you thought on balance you would vote for him. Now you're telling me you don't know. You've gone from being a Trump supporter, Tim, to being a floating voter. I mean, that is again quite a move.
Yeah, well, maybe I am moving all the time. You could get me tomorrow, though, John, and I may say something slightly different. You know, I think, like a lot of us, we spend a lot of time talking about Trump, a lot of time thinking about him, and you know, he's dominating. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if some people in Britain thought that actually Trump was the leader of our country, let alone, you know, America. He's sort of ever present. But no, I'm tortured. I think the West is in fundamental decline. I think America's in fundamental decline, and I thought Trump represented a gamble, but a gamble that might have begun to restore American power. His investment in the military, his willingness to lift burdens of business, his what I think is a sensible policy on climate change. But some of the mistakes he's making, you know, a lot of the world will not trust America and the West again because of the prevarication on Ukraine, the moral blindness. A lot of the West will not trust America because of the way it's played. You know, it's not made any distinction between allies and adversaries on tariffs policy, and the damage has already been done to a large extent. Even if even if he was an angel from now on, I think it's going to be a long time before a lot of people look at America in the same way.
Yeah, it's really interesting seeing this thought process in progress. Rachel, what's the sort of the prevailing thought with you on this 100 days?
Well, I just want to say it's really interesting to hear Tim's reflections there, because I think they echo reflections of people here in the UK of your general political persuasion, because there's been some interesting polling that was out a couple of weeks ago of different voter groups and how their views of Trump have changed over time. And I don't think it will come as much of a surprise to know that Trump is very unpopular among UK voters in general. He's got an unpopularity rating. 80% of voters have an unpopular view of him. But the really interesting thing has been among Reform voters who, at the start of his term, tended to have a much more positive view of him. And the crossover point where really that popularity rating among Reform voters specifically started to fall was the meeting in the Oval Office with Zelensky, and the sense that Trump wasn't standing up to Russia in the way that you would expect a US president to do so. And then the tariffs have also compounded that. And I've been speaking to campaigners ahead of the local elections on Thursday from the Lib Dems, from the Conservatives, from Labour, even some Reform. But from the first three, I have had the message that it's coming up on the doorstep that people don't like the response from Farage and Reform to Trump, but also they want Britain and Keir Starmer to take a stronger line against the White House and to sort of stand up for him more in the way that the comments of sort of Mark Carney, who is now Canadian Prime Minister. So I think it is shifting opinion here in the UK as well, for all of the reasons that Tim said, as well as the reason, I think, of just blowing up the norms and the precedents of the global order and making the whole world feel a lot less stable and a lot less secure than it did a few months ago.
Yeah, I can testify to that, even re-testify to that. Just less than a week ago, spoke to Luke Trill of the Post-Brexit in Common, who came up with polling which showed exactly what you described there. There is a very strong appetite, among the British public to see our leader take a stronger line against Donald Trump, for this country to take a line against those aspects of the Trump presidency that they don't like, even if it comes with some sort of economic cost. But you raise a point there for Tim. Tim is our friendly local Reform supporter. We can all remember Nigel Farage just trading on his closeness and friendness with Donald Trump the entire time. Now, I may have missed it, Tim, but that seems to have gone rather quiet now.
You haven't missed it, John. And look, you may love him or loathe him, but one thing you can say about Nigel Farage, he's a brilliant politician. And he will, he's an intense student of politics. And so, he will not have not noticed that Trump isn't popular at the moment, and he's gone silent. He will not have noticed how Pierre Poilievre has, sunk without, actually lost his own seat, the leader of the Canadian Conservative Party in yesterday's Canadian election. Well,
the logic of this, Tim, the logic of that is maybe it's time for Nigel Farage to start battering Donald Trump a little bit. As you say, he goes where the votes, by which I mean the money, is, and that's where the votes are at the moment, isn't it?
Well,
if you're looking for those swing votes.
Farage has been critical of Trump on the tariff front. He's actually been more openly critical of the tariffs than the UK government has, in part, I think, because it has fewer consequences for him than it does if Keir Starmer starts slagging off Trump. But I thought that was really interesting, that change of tone.
Thank you, Rachel, for that. And not only that, but he criticised Vance when Vance appeared to criticise British troops, their service abroad, when Kemi Badenoch wouldn't. And actually, very early in the unravelling of Trump's position on Ukraine, he said, well, he supported Ukraine membership of NATO. So there is.
He did. Yes, he did.
Fundamentally, it's why I support him, John. And look, he's not perfect. I'm not perfect. I've tried to be really honest with you in every conversation we have every Tuesday about what I believe. And
you do.
It's not easy to sort of admit you're wrong, and I think maybe I was really wrong in the gamble I took. But I do think I talked to Nigel a lot. I'm privileged to talk to him a lot. And he confides to me some of the doubts he has about things. But one thing I really believe in is he's ultimately a patriot. And if he thinks it's in Britain's interest to be close to Trump, he will say so. But if ultimately he decides that Trump has become a net negative, he will put the loyalty to this country before Trump. And that's why I'm happy to be a Reform supporter.
Okay, interesting thoughts and interesting answers. I mean, both of you, Rachel and Tim, how do you rate our own Prime Minister's handling of Donald Trump? I mean, as a Trump whisperer, as it were, how does he rate, do you think, Keir Starmer? Rachel?
I think he's in an incredibly difficult position, and I can understand why officials in the Labour government are happy with how that first meeting went. Keir Starmer in the Oval Office handing the President an invite for a second state visit, and that there was statesmanship on display there. And for all that the British people may think that they want to see a Hugh Grant Love Actually moment where he stands up to the US President, the cost of that could be really significant. I mean, they already are significant when you look at things like the tariffs on cars and steel and aluminium, and that's when Britain is getting the sort of the lowest baseline tariffs that there are. But I think there is a dawning realisation within the Labour government that even if you are one of the countries that Trump has a slightly better relationship with than some of the others, you can't necessarily count on that. He's a very unreliable ally. And for all that Starmer likes to say that it's not a choice between the US and the EU and that Britain can be a bridge and that we can have the best of both worlds, the EU is closer, it's larger as a trading partner, and it is also, for all the dysfunction and gridlock, a more reliable trading partner than somebody in the White House who will change his mind multiple times a day, it seems, on whether to impose tariffs and what level of tariffs and what he wants in return. And I think that understanding is growing, and you can see it in the language. You heard it last week with Rachel Reeves talking about how the government were a bit more concerned with what was going on in the EU than in Washington. Yeah. And they're right to be, because it's more likely that what gets decided in the EU will still be what the EU has decided in a month's time.
Yeah, I mean, Tom said, look, as a pretty convinced Eurosceptic and Brexit supporter, I mean, what do you say to that? The future when it comes to important trading relationships is on the landmass closest to us, not the one across the Atlantic. What do you think?
I think it's both and more. And, the growth is in the Pacific region, the Asia. And, one of the good advantages of Brexit, I'm going to be on message now rather than being the ditherer that I've been in the last half hour, is, we were able to join the Pacific Trade Agreement recently with other countries ahead of the EU. So, look, we need to expand our markets in all sorts of ways. The British economy is in trouble. And I think, yes, we need reasonable ties with Europe, and I wouldn't be against, I don't think we set our relationship in Europe in stone. There may be ways of improving our trading relationship, just as I hope there's ways of improving our relationship with America. The thing about Europe, though, it is a continent in decline. Relatively, it's a declining continent. The growth markets are elsewhere. So what I think would be dangerous is even Keir Starmer, even Peter Mandelson, sort of arch Europhiles, have admitted that, take the industry at AI, huge opportunities for Britain in AI. Yes, it's hard to change the regulation of an industry that's already established. So, the talk about, different fridge standards, for example, for the EU after Brexit, that was a nonsense. Industries are already used to those standards. But in emergent industries, which really are the future, biomedicines and other area, actually being free from European regulation and European harmonisation is a huge opportunity for Britain to go in a different direction than what was generally a heavily regulated markets whenever Brussels is in charge.
Yeah, I mean, Rachel, you take a very sort of pragmatic, hard-nosed diplomacy view of Keir Starmer keeping on the right side of Donald Trump. And now I read in the Times that him and his team are working hard to land for the Trump empire, the Open Golf Championship, the ancient, revered golf championship of the planet. He wants that in Turnberry, because Donald Trump owns it. I mean, is there any part of that I don't know, just rankles a little bit with you, or are you of the view, like Ed Lucas writing in the Times a few days ago, that this stuff is really quite cheap? If it buys you a bit of credit, then go for it.
Yeah, I'm of the view of what's the point of having soft power if you don't use it? And Britain does have advantages when it comes to Trump. One of them being the golf courses, one of them being the royal family. Again, what's the point of having a royal family if you don't utilise them at key moments? And in terms of the cost, I would much rather give Trump a golf tournament where he wants to have a golf tournament than back down on things like online safety regulation, for example, where the British Parliament has passed something and our Parliament is meant to be sovereign. And I would rather that we gave him a golf tournament than allowed ourselves to be bullied from someone overseas. So, yeah, you've got the soft power, use it. That's what it's there for.
All right, Rachel and Tim, we'd love to talk to you because it always is. In a moment, I'm going to be talking to our American team of friends on Pienaar and Friends, Casey Balls, the new Washington editor at The Times, and David Charter, a veteran of the Times operation right here. They're both going to be joining me, and we are going to be streaming live for you on YouTube. So if you fancy it, do look in, watch the action, as well as listening to the conversation. Now, though, 6:30, so here's the news with Laura Cook.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker.
I'm 100.
A White House aide and a pollster as well. And actually, Josh Glancy of the Sunday Times will be joining us for the first hour. Josh was, of course, you'll remember back in the day, John, the Washington bureau chief, now editor of the Sunday Times News Review. So he'll be spending some time with us this evening. There's a bit of UK news in there as well. We'll be speaking to David Charter, who's going to be looking ahead to, obviously David's with you at the moment, we'll be looking ahead to Donald Trump's next 100 days. And a bit later on in our panel, John, we're going to be playing a game of Guess That Soundbite. We'll be broadcasting some of the most well-known Donald Trump soundbites, and we'll leave it up to Freddie Greer, the Spectator, and Zoe Strimple, the columnist and author and former Bostonian, to try and guess that Donald Trump moment as we reflect on this 100 days. I can guarantee loads of debate, loads of interesting conversation. We'll try and sum it all up this evening. Continue your good work.
All right, looking forward to your show, Casey. We are having a ball out here. It is it's always a good time to come here, frankly. This story is just so deeply fascinating. Katie Ball's here with me, David Charter here with me, and going to be with you, Casey, a bit later on. We're squeezing David like a ripe lemon, and I'm going to ask first of all, David, for your thought for the day.
Okay, the pips squeak. Well, look, Trump came in the day before he was inaugurated. He said he would have the most extraordinary first 100 days of any presidency in American history. And do you know what? I think for once, the Trump hyperbole is perfectly justified. We've really seen an astonishing, I think, start to the presidency that we knew he was prepared to take extreme measures to arrest migrants and deport them and close up the border. We knew he wanted to try and bring prices down, but we did not know, I think, some of the more shocking measures that he's brought in, like the scope of the tariffs that were announced. Also, the way they've been handled has been, as you know, convulsing global stock markets. And here we come into his impact on the world. He doesn't just want to make America great again. He wants to reorder the world.
Yeah. I am fascinated to hear you say this, because I've heard Donald Trump over and over again tell us he's the most consequential president in the history of humanity since the birth of the Republic. And whenever I hear this, I sort of inwardly roll my eyes. And you, an objective commentator of some judgment, is echoing that claim. Abe Lincoln, he kept the Union together during the 1861 Civil War. George Washington, he gave the world the Republic, fought for the new Republic against the British colonial power. And you say that he's right to say that. Just give me some comparison then. Why does he rank above those presidents? Eisenhower, who turned the tide of World War II, and we could go on a bit, but Trump.
Yeah, I would say that I'm not personally placing him above those, but the fact that we're discussing him in the same bracket
and seriously contemplating
should give us pause for reflection, because it feels like we're in one of those paradigm changes that perhaps happens once. Not just in a generation, but every several generations. And what Trump has set about doing is reordering a world that was created after the Second World War by Eisenhower, among others, of course. The institutions that we've come to know that have ordered our international affairs, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization, all of these forums for doing international business and a way of conducting foreign affairs which is, broadly speaking, collaborative between the democracies of the world, and trying to draw in the autocracies into that loop as well, has been torn up by Trump. I think he doesn't. He and his crowd, he and the Trump circle, do not think that is serving the best interests of Americans anymore.
Yes.
That's what they think their voters are telling them.
Yes.
And they want a different way of doing things that's fundamentally based on a late 19th century model of the great powers using the power that they've got to take the powers to take the power that they can to force the world to do things how they want it, not to negotiate it in an international forum, but to use the sheer brute muscle that Trump keeps talking about, that he's got. Whoever has the gold he said it the other day, the golden rule of a negotiation is whoever has the gold sets the table for the negotiation.
I mean, the line of thinking there is perfectly clear. The idea of tearing up, the post-World War II security alliance, NATO, and all that goes with those strategic relationships. The idea of tearing up the whole concept of global trade as we've known it and has been so significantly driven by America, retreating from all of that, rewriting all of that. I mean, you don't get much more consequential than all of that. I'm not going to ask you, David, I'm going to get your thoughts on all this in a second, Katie. I'm not going to ask you, David, to give a kind of your own objective judgment on this. That's kind of not what we do. And we give objective judgments, which can be quite hard around the edges from time to time. But does what you're describing, the mindset around Donald Trump and in the White House now, can that be described as a product of rational thought?
Oh, it's completely rational. If you look at it from Trump world, where they've been listening to the kind of disenchanted Americans who've been waiting for an opportunity like this, perhaps for decades. They've picked up on a disgruntlement with elites. And by elites, we're not just talking about the government. We're talking about all of the institutions that have grown up in the post-war world, from the media, education, the universities, the tax system. So not just politics; it's the whole way that America has been organised.
But is a reaction to anger, which may be perfectly easy, relatively easy to analyse, the anger leading to what we've got now, does that add up to a chain of rational thought? I mean, I'm reminded of back in the day before the day, listening to the argument at home in the United Kingdom at the time of the Thatcher government, when there was a particularly ideologically driven member of the Thatcher cabinet called Keith Joseph. And I remember an occasion in the floor of the House of Commons, a really telling speech that was aimed at Keith Joseph by Michael Foot. Now, at that time, Michael Foot was leader of the Labour Party. He was one of the most persuasive debaters you would ever see in your life. And he had a good laugh at Keith Joseph. He said that he was like a magician who got hold of someone in the audience, said, "Give me your watch," put it in a handkerchief and smashed it up. And then having done that, he said, "I've forgotten the rest of the trick." So, I mean, the smashing up of things, the response to people who want to see things broken, okay. But in the end, you want to end up with some sort of working watch.
So I'm mindful.
Did I torture that analogy too far?
I'm mindful of what Frank Luntz told me, who's a great political analyst here, which is that Donald Trump has got this power and this devotion and this belief and the trust and faith of his supporters because he's got the right diagnosis.
Yes.
He's explained and offered a pathway, a vision for people who haven't had one under the traditional political system. But while he's got the diagnosis correct, the execution is so far lacking.
Yes.
And
the magician who's forgotten the rest of the trick.
Right. So I think your watch analogy is a good one. However, what is said about Trump is that it's a cult of personality. When people see the broken watch, it's over, and that's the end of Trumpism. When Trump leaves office, it's over. But what's happened is that in those 4 years when he was out of office, a group of people have gathered around him that springing from his diagnosis and his ability to seize power in America, and they have created a whole philosophy out of Trumpism that could well endure with the appointment of JD Vance, who is the, if you like, the brains behind a lot of the forward-looking philosophy beyond Trump's apparently day-to-day delivery of his promises. There is a very far-reaching agenda to reorder not just America but the world.
Yes. JD Vance, there he is. He's the man on the make. I mean, he's been flexible in his ideological convictions, put it that way, on his way to being the number 2 guy at the White House. And just another sort of reflection from a distant memory. It was said of Disraeli, Benjamin Disraeli, that he didn't really mind which way the carriage of state was going as long as he was driving it, and that something of the same could be said about JD Vance. His job is to be in the box seat driving it, and just doing that is the end of the game as far as he's concerned at this point, this stage in his career and his life in America. Kate, give me your perspective, your big broad perspective. You must have been reflecting on this as an incoming Washington editor. Tell me what you think.
I mean, I think on JD Vance, of course, if we judged every single figure in Donald Trump's orbit for where they had at one point been critical of Donald Trump or said they didn't believe in him or they didn't support him, you wouldn't really have any left. It's almost it is the exception to the rule if you've been a Trump loyalist your whole time. If you think of past comments, rivals and so forth. I think on JD Vance, I mean, you go back to Hillbilly Elegy, the book, which I think now he is a politician, people see it a little bit differently. But some of those arguments about manufacturing, which you can link back to tariffs, this idea of reindustrialization, bringing things back, there is a coherence there. And I would agree with David that, of course, politicians always change their spots to get ahead, and it's slightly a trick of the system, the way we have it. But there was a reason JD Vance was picked as the vice president as opposed to someone like Rubio. And I think there was a feeling amongst Donald Trump loyalists, including some of his children, that JD Vance would be much better to carry the torch of Trumpism or some form of that onwards. And if that does come to pass, and of course you look at the economy, you look at the midterms, there's lots of reasons to question whether it'll be a Republican win next time around. But it would probably mean this realignment lives far beyond Trump.
Yeah, and as for President Trump's place in the sort of the pantheon, in the firmament of American presidents. I mean, having said that, when I hear the president, as we all have many times, tell us he's the biggest thing that's ever happened to the presidency, you sort of think, really? But then the conversation we're having now makes me think, look, maybe he does just tick the box of consequential presidents. In fact, it's getting difficult to see any other point of view, Casey.
Well, he takes up the whole news vacuum. I mean, in the UK, having just come from Westminster, I mean, every day really since Donald Trump returned to the White House has been a day where by the time you get to Washington, D.C. time, the whole UK news agenda starts to change because of what's happening here. But I also think there's a question about, there's lots happening right now. How permanent and long-lasting is it going to be? So much is currently done for executive orders.
Yes.
You do not have Donald Trump looking for, changes that would be harder to undo.
Yes.
If he went to the fact that he currently has control
Yes.
of the Senate,
Yes.
of the House.
Yes.
And there's lots of theories as to why that is the case. But I think to put them in the category of the most impactful, it has to be a permanent change.
Okay, really, really interesting thought. We've got more to say in just a moment between us all, and I want to hear what you're thinking. Listening to this, send me that text, send me that tweet. Do join in the conversation. Here's just a little tip for now. If you want a sneak preview of tomorrow's Times front page, who wouldn't want that? Just tune into Times Radio at 10 every evening. It's there for you every night after 10. We bring you the front pages before they are published. 10:30. Through the papers with a panel of really outstanding reviewers. It's here for you every night on Times Radio. You are listening now to Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio, coming to you live from Washington, D.C. We're in association with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
The Times at 1, sponsored by Solo with Hive.
I'm John Pienaar here with Pienaar and Friends in Washington, D.C., sitting at our little pop-up studio in a corner of we just borrowed some space, put it that way. And David Chance has joined us, so has Casey Balls. So look, there's been a build-up to this 100 days, and there always is in the Washington calendar, one or two events that just come along, by time-honored tradition. I want to hear and share thoughts on something that happened just the other day. by tradition, it is an enormously interesting and fun event. It is the White House Correspondents' dinner. As it happens, Katie and David were both there. In white tie, David, is it a white tie?
It's a black tie.
It's a black tie dinner, and you would have been very glamorous, Katie, I've no doubt. Whatever. So how was the dinner, Katie? What was it like?
It was interesting because it was as we were told by the host, Eugene Daniels, who's the chair of the White House Correspondents Association, this is not your normal dinner because there was no president and there was no comedian. There was no president because Donald Trump, as we know, is not a huge fan of the White House Correspondents, or at least the legacy ones. I think he's got more time for some of the influencers and new media who have arrived. And he didn't attend last time. He was in the White House. And then secondly, they had to cancel the comedian because the comedian who was booked made some comments about Donald Trump related to murder. And
was that some previous dinner or something?
Well, it was after they were booked.
Right.
So then it became a bit of a mini scandal, one could say. As some correspondents thought perhaps having this comedian wouldn't be the best look as they try and say to the White House, we're going to give you a fair hearing. So it meant that this was a dinner which had no politicians really, no comedians.
Was there any point to this, David, at all?
There was lots of journalists getting awards, right?
Yeah, it was.
We do love to give each other awards, don't we?
Not us, though.
It is a big annual event, which is the American journalists do love it because they get a chance to dress up and hand each other awards. We left during the awards, didn't we? Towards the end. Anyway,
That's a secret.
They did go on quite a long time. But the main point of it is actually normally you get to rub shoulders with the most powerful people in the country.
Yeah.
Of course, this time there were 0 members of the cabinet there, as far as I was aware. I did bump into a few senior Democrats and
how senior were they?
The governor of Maryland said hello to Wes Moore.
Oh, he's seen as a potential.
Yeah, he's a potential. Yeah, definitely. And I did point him out to someone as a potential future president, and it's not beyond the realms of imagination, especially as he was the only potential future president in the room. So, British ambassador was there, of course.
Was he? Did you sit near Peter Mandelson?
Can I tell you what table he was on?
Yes.
He was on the Wall Street Journal table.
Oh, well, nothing wrong with that. Man of taste.
But I did manage to say hello, and I tried to ask about the state of the tariff negotiations, but they're very sensitive, so there was not too much information forthcoming. And so mainly it was a chance to try and see who was there, who you could rub shoulders, because there's always a break during the dinner service, like between the courses, where you set off round the room and try and spot some interesting faces to bump into. And then the pre-drinks and the post-drinks, these parties have become, I think, as Katie will testify, perhaps even more useful events than the actual dinner itself.
Yeah. Well, having just arrived, I got some advice from American friends who'd been in DC for a while, and they said, don't worry about looking for a flat to share, just worry about getting invited to after parties. So that's why I currently don't have a flat.
Right.
But I did ask...
Sleep on the National Mall,
yeah.
to the right party.
But I can just go out, no. So I went to the dinner, and then I snuck off a little bit early to head to Butterworth's, which is a restaurant near the Hill, which is a MAGA-friendly, one might say. Okay. And that was a MAGA party called the Uninvited, and it was almost a rival party to the establishment party. Steve Bannon was one of the organisers.
Okay.
And
was that fun?
There. Everything is fun in some way, and all of a sudden there was lots of commotion, and Marco Rubio arrived at this party. So you actually had your senior figures going to the MAGA parties rather than the official one, which I thought was quite interesting, and gives you a snapshot, I think, into the media landscape when it comes to the second Trump term.
Yeah, I mean, look, talking about media big hitters, I spoke just a while ago here on the programme to Chuck Todd. Don't know if you know Chuck Todd. Guys, former presenter of NBC's Meet the Press. He's got a podcast now, which I was happy to plug. It was Chuck Toddcast, and there I am plugging it again. Anyway, he spoke to me earlier and had this to say.
But it's like being on a boat that's rocking. You're there's a ton of motion, but you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And we just really, if anything, we've retracted in what he's done with the economy. I think this is the equivalent of the Afghanistan moment for Joe Biden. And the reason I believe the Afghanistan moment was so destructive to his presidency, even though it was early on, was voters thought the one thing he had core competence in was foreign affairs. So they never expected his biggest blunder to be on that topic. And when that happened, I think it's why he never recovered. His job approval rating never gets back over 45 because you're like, whoa, that was your best issue and you messed that up? It means everything else is probably a mess.
Yeah.
For Donald Trump, what voters believed is that the economy was his best issue.
Right.
That this is what he knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And instead, he's cost people money. You can't buy a house right now. You wouldn't put your house on the market. Everything is unstable. Everything is uncertain. And we're probably about a month away from empty shelves.
Interesting stuff there from Chuck Todd, pretty much describing the ups and downs of the tariff war as a self-inflicted wound that is not going to heal. Now, David, look, there's a Times poll. What does it say about that and about everything else that's interesting?
Well, that's a great question, John, because we found, and we're not alone on this, that across the board, Democrats, Republicans, and independents are very nervous about the economy, which was, as Chuck was saying in your clip, supposed to be Trump's strongest suit. And we asked what was the best achievement and the biggest mistake of the first 100 days. And Republicans, Democrats, and independents were united that the biggest mistake is tariffs.
Yes.
By some distance. That was down as the biggest mistake. The best achievement, by the way, was the rounding up and deporting illegal migrants. But I think several other questions in the polling, such as only 11% of Americans saying they feel better off under Trump. And you may say, well, he's only had 100 days. But only, I think it was 33% said they thought they would be better off in a year's time because of these policies.
That's a dark.
That was really telling to me.
Yeah, isn't it, Casey?
Yeah, I think so. And on the tariffs, when you speak to Republicans, when you speak to some of Donald Trump's natural supporters, I think the thing that keeps coming back up is that is the area where they are struggling to be supportive of the president. And perhaps that's a conversation which is happening privately. Not everyone is going out publicly against the president yet. But certainly I think it is fracturing his base.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll just mention this. One of our listeners, turns out a listener from Russia, has written in, who tells us this. I'm from Russia, and I'm very surprised how Americans gave power to Trump. To have the greatest country in the world torn apart by a crazy swindler is a crime for which every American is guilty. I don't know precisely how you weight that comment from Russia. I know little about the author of that piece, but I throw it in because it's come in, and it's not uninteresting at this stage of the game. Look, to sort of wind up on the point that we started this part of the programme, 100 days, it's all very arbitrary. It's kind of an excuse for people like us to get together and you scribble and me talk about the state of a government or a new leader. This may turn out to be, I was suggesting tentatively, more than that. Maybe a crossroads moment where, given what you've been saying about tariffs and more importantly the effects on the American public, given where we are on the war in Ukraine and that transatlantic security relationship, things could be different now if Donald Trump reads the rooms and decides to adjust accordingly. In a word, do you think that's going to happen? In a word, David?
I think we should get together again in another 100 days, John.
Yeah.
And because we've got these big tax cuts coming up. If he gets that agenda through, then the economy could turn in his favour.
Your final word on this, Casey?
I think we need a 200-day show. Come back.
There it is. We will consider ourselves invited. And meanwhile, we're going to be back here in the same place tomorrow. Thank you for listening. Kate Borsey's next.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
Thanks, John. Loving the coverage from Washington. And that will continue, of course, here on Times Radio. It is 7 o'clock. This is Kate Borsey and the